Let's go ahead. We have,
And we are live.
great. Okay. Andy, did you want to start off or should I just kick in and jump?
Go right ahead. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy Port, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. This is our hearing for the agenda evening of November 10th, 2020, our start time being 7 p.m. and it being 7 p.m. We're going to go ahead and start our meeting agenda this evening. For those of you that may not have participated in a Zoom version of an administrative municipal hearing such as ZBA, such as, every board and commission during COVID. I'll give you a quick outline of how things will proceed. To begin with, I'm going to start by introducing our board. We'll go through our agenda. For those of you that may or may not have the agenda, it's all available on the City of Newburyport's website. If you click on the agenda itself, there's also a hyperlink that takes you to all the related materials for each application that's on our agenda this evening. We'll follow the agenda, and as soon as I introduce the board, we'll go right into the roll call. Then we'll go into the public hearings. There is one matter that's being shifted to the end of our agenda because one of our members has to recuse themselves, and then there'll be another matter that is a request for a continuance. We'll address those matters first for in the interest and out of courtesy of those that might be in attendance to speak or at least listen in connection with those applications, so that you don't spend the next hour or so listening only to hear the matter continued. So without further ado, we will go through the roll call this evening. And I'll begin by introducing myself. My name is Rob Champetti. I'm the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have in attendance this evening, Mr. Mark Moore, our vice chair, Mr. Stephen Delisle, our secretary, Ms. Rachel Webb, member, Mr. Ken Swanton, member, Mr. Walter Channon, associate member, and Mr. Brendan Banovic, also associate member. Also in attendance this evening is Caitlin Sullivan, our city planner, and Mr. Andy Port, our planning director, as well as Gretchen Joy, our keeper of the minutes. So I will jump right into the roll call, and then we'll get started with our public hearings. Just for those of you that are logging on or are attending for the first time, with the Zoning Board of Appeals, a successful application has to receive at least 4 votes in the affirmative. I will designate which are our 5 voting members this evening. We have associate members as well as full members, but we will designate our 5 voting members. And if there is a recusal of any voting member, then the next available associate member will step up and become a voting member. I'll let everyone know for the record who that individual is, should that come to pass. So without further ado, calling the roll, Mr. Mark Moore, and just please respond, members of the ZBA, with either here or present. Mr. Mark Moore.
I am here.
Mr. Stephen Delisle.
Here.
Ms. Rachel Webb.
Here.
Mr. Ken Swanton.
Here.
Mr. Walter Bud Channon.
Here.
And Mr. Brendan Banovic.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Banovic. And again, I'm Rob Champetti. I'll also answer present. So we have a full board present, and the voting members this evening will be myself, Mr. Moore, Mr. Delisle, Ms. Webb, and Mr. Swanton. And in the event of a recusal, we'll have Mr. Banovic step up as the voting member. And I believe there's one matter on the application of 468th Street where I have to recuse myself, and Mr. Banovic will be the 5th voting member on that application. Mr. Moore, our vice chair, will step up on that application as chairman. Okay, so we have the minutes from our last meeting. Although it's not shown in our agenda, we know that we have minutes from Ms. Gretchen Joy. Do members of the ZBA, anyone have any comments, questions, modifications, or revisions to the minutes? Mr. Moore.
I was not in attendance at the last meeting, so I'll have no comments.
Okay, Mr. Delisle.
I do not have any.
Okay, Ms. Webb.
Yes, I have a couple. Page 2, let's see. The second paragraph, let's see, he said a single curb cut would be preferable in general. Oh, it's something, Rob, that you were quoted as saying. Mr. Champetti said the curb cut already exists and he does, I think the word not should be there, does not know of any prohibition against a second curb cut. That was one. Let's see. Moving to page 4. Just the word tenure is misspelled in the third paragraph. And then the last paragraph of the page, on page 4, the second sentence says substantial evidence has been provided that I think it's supposed to say the rear addition structure has no remaining market value or reasonable use. They did not intend to be making that statement about the entire structure, I don't believe. That was Mr. Delisle quoting. So, and then my last comment was on the last page, or under general business, that discussion that we had about streamlining the way we receive emails. I thought that the minutes accurately reflected the discussion. However, I think after that, didn't we vote to just keep it the way it is, even though people thought that it sounded like it made sense? I don't know. I guess.
Okay. Well, I'll poll the rest of the members as well, Rachel, so we can see folks' thoughts on that. Any members of the ZBA having heard Ms. Webb's, Rachel, was that the extent of your comment?
Yes, thank you, Rob.
Okay. Having heard the extent of Ms. Webb's comments on the minutes, do any members of the ZBA have any further comments or responses or further discussion on those changes? Seeing no hands from the members, we'll continue to move on. Mr. Swanton, any comments, changes, or revisions to our minutes from our last meeting?
No, I don't.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Shannon.
No additions or changes.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Benovic.
No additions as well.
Okay, and I have no changes either. And so if we could have a motion from the members of the board with the with the adoption of the changes requested by Ms. Webb, a motion and a second is what we'll need to advance the minutes to approval. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes as amended by Ms. Webb.
Seconded. Seconded, Ken Swanton.
Okay, and Mr. Delisle, were you the moving? Did you move on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great, thank you. So the motion's made by Mr. Delisle and seconded by Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Having not been in attendance or qualified myself,
Okay,
do I vote on this?
You can abstain.
I abstain.
Okay, Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Ms. Webb,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Benovic,
Yes.
and Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 6 in the affirmative. The motion carries. The minutes are adopted with the modifications submitted by Ms. Webb. Thank you. Okay, so moving to the public hearings. Before we jump in, I'm going to just quickly outline for everyone how the process and flow of a ZBA hearing works. For those of you that haven't attended one of these, it's an informative way to know what to expect. For those of you that have, I'll apologize in advance for the outline of what we do and how we do it. So because the meeting is held under the Roberts Rules of Order, we will begin with each application. I'll read the application as the chairman. I'll read the legal description as well as the applicants by name, as well as identifying by the docket number, the application itself, and a descriptor such as special permit for nonconformities, variance, etc., with a description of the requested relief as per the legal notice that was published in the Daily News and as per the agenda. After we read the legal description notice, we'll call it, I will then invite the applicant or the applicant's representative to make their presentation to the board. That's the portion at which point the applicant or the applicant's attorney, engineer, architect, or or any variation in combination of the above, will make a presentation of the application to the board. At the conclusion of that, I will then close that section of the meeting, and we will then go to questions. I'm sorry, we'll go to comments from the public. It used to be that we would elicit those who wish to speak in support, those that wish to speak in opposition, but what we've been doing recently is to simply elicit those who wish to speak. And whether you are in support of or in opposition to or just wish to speak, there is no section for you to speak up. Just simply raise your hand by clicking the bottom right of your Zoom webinar screen. It will raise your hand, and then our planning director, Mr. Port, will then unmute your mic. Make sure as you look at the bottom left of that screen, there's a mute button. It should be green, where it says mute my audio should be unchecked. Most likely it is checked, and there'll be a red line through it. So you'll want to uncheck that. Mr. Port will unmute your mic, and then we will all hear from you. We ask that you give your name and address as well before you speak. And we also ask, as a courtesy to all of those that wish to speak, that you kindly keep your comments to more or less about 2 minutes or less. After we hear from everyone who wishes to speak in support, in opposition, or otherwise, just speak, we will close that portion of the public hearing, and we will go to questions from the board. This is when the board members themselves will pose questions, sometimes adapted from questions or comments made by the public, because there's no real response part of that process. The board members will adapt those questions and form them in the form of questions to either the applicant or the applicant's representatives or otherwise. Those questions are posed by the board to members of the applicant themselves, after which we will close that portion of the hearing and we will go to deliberations. Deliberations is the segment of the public hearing when members of the public and members of, as well as applicants and abutters and anyone in between gets to essentially listen to the ZBA think out loud. Deliberations are where the Zoning Board of Appeals deliberates the legal standard that the applicant must meet, whether that standard's been met, questions that are posed, and the members themselves will pose questions by and between each other as they deliberate out loud in sort of full transparent view of everyone who is in attendance. At the conclusion of deliberations, we'll close that portion of the public hearing, and under the Roberts Rules of Order, in order to advance the matter, a motion is then elicited by me. I'll ask one of the members to submit a motion to approve. Now, a motion to approve is just simply how we advance an application. It doesn't mean that that member is necessarily in support of the application, but rather it's just the mechanism by which under Robert's rules, we will advance it. So it's the matter is advanced by a member making a motion to approve. That motion is then seconded, and then we will call the roll. In order for the application to be successful, at least 4 voting members must vote in the affirmative. Having kind of walked through the process, we'll then begin with our first matter. And since this is a matter that has myself as the chair, I have to recuse myself on. We are, and I just want to get elicit from the board whether the board wishes to move this matter to the end of our agenda. This is the matter of 468th Street, Ryan McShera, Red Barn Architecture, special permit for nonconformities. And since this one has been sort of an ongoing matter, do we wish to move that to the end of the agenda, or does the board have any other kind of thoughts on how to proceed, or whether to proceed with that first?
This is Mark Moore. I'm comfortable moving it to the end if it makes more sense logistically for everybody.
Okay. Anyone else? I see in attendance that we have, I believe I saw Ryan McShera of Red Barn in attendance. Mr. McShera, Andy, can you unmute his mic? I just want to make sure we ask whether he has any objection or strenuous objection to us taking that action to move his matter to the end of the agenda.
And Chair, Attorney Mead has her hand raised as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Attorney Mead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have an objection at the pleasure of the board to move this matter to the end of the agenda.
Okay, great. And my apologies. I should have recognized that that Attorney Mead was presenting on 468th. Okay. Well, thank you, Attorney Mead. And so then, without Without further deliberation, we will move the matter of
Say, Rob,
468.
Rob,
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Ken Swanton. I think there's also at least one abutter here who is also here for that topic. And just like we asked the applicant,
Oh,
of
course.
could we just ask any abutters if that time works for them too?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that, Mr. Swanton. So, so the question goes out to any members of the audience that are here to speak one way or the other in connection with that application. We are imposing upon everyone, indeed, when we make a shift like this, and whether we make it or not, we definitely wish to do it with the benefit of everyone's input. I see one hand raised. It's a Tara Kamet. Mr. Port, can we unmute Miss Kamet's mic, please?
Hi there. Yeah, we're fine with pushing it to the end, whatever's best.
Okay.
for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamet. And again, thank you, Mr. Swanton, for reminding me to make sure that we polled the whole room. Seeing no further hands on this, we will go ahead and move this application to the end of our agenda. And in doing so, we will then jump into the first public hearing, which is the matter of 758th Street. I'm going to go ahead and read the legal notice, and then we'll hear from Attorney Mead on behalf of the applicant. This is an application continued from the meeting of October 27th, 758th Street, docket 2020-074, a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant, Dan Graovac, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC, a special permit for nonconformities to demolish an existing home and construct a new single-family home on a nonconforming lot. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. However, in this particular instance, my colleague, Libby Bowker, who's on, will be taking the lead on this. I will be chiming in later on. And Eileen Graff, who is the architect, will also be speaking on this. And present this evening is Dan Graovac, the owner of the property as well. So with that, I would turn it over to Libby. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Bowker.
Hi, yes, can everyone hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Excellent. Good evening, Chair and members of the board. As Lisa said, my name is Libby Bowker from Mead, Tellerman and Costa, and I'm here to present the special permit application for 758th Street. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what let's jump it down a little bit further. Let's see. Oh, no, here we go. So what we're seeking is a special permit to modify a pre-existing non-conforming structure. The structure as it exists today is a modest 635 square foot footprint, 2-bedroom house. It's at grade. It was built in or around the 1950s. It's located in the R3 and the Plum Island Overlay District, or the PIOD. It is a pre-existing non-conforming structure and lot. The lot area is smaller than required by zoning. The frontage, the house is too close to the front lot line. It is has smaller frontage than required under zoning. It's too close to the side B lot line, and it's too close to the rear setback. In all other aspects, the structure and property do comply with the dimensional requirements of the PIOD. Next slide, please. Here are the elevations of the existing structure. As you can see, at grade, relatively small. We do have the square footage calculations in the lower left-hand corner. So that's the 635 square feet. And then there's also a shed on the property, which is 79 square feet. And so the existing FAR for this property is 16.9. Next slide, please. So the proposed project is to remove the pre-existing non-conforming 2-bedroom single-family home, it's a lot of hyphens, and construct a new 2-bedroom single-family home. This footprint is going to shrink. It's going to go from 635 square feet to 560. It will be elevated on pilings to conform with floodplain requirements. There will be parking underneath, consolidating the impact on the lot. And it does say here adding a shed. I'm mistaken. The shed is actually already there and it's going to continue to be there. So some other positives of this project is it's making the structure more compliant with the PIOD requirements. It's completely eliminating the front yard setback nonconformity. It's reducing the side B setback nonconformity. It's reducing the rear yard setback nonconformity. It's reducing the lot coverage. So the structure is going to take up less space over the lot than the existing coverage. In that vein, it's also going to increase the open space of the lot. As I mentioned before, it's reducing the structure's footprint, and all the aspects that it does not improve, it will maintain compliance with the other dimensional requirements. Next slide, please. So this is just a visual of what I just said, kind of turning that narrative into numbers. Here you can see the parameters that I walked through, the PIOD requirements, the existing structure status, and then the proposed. And here you can see that the front setback is totally eliminated. We're pulling the house far enough back that it would comply with PIOD requirements. We're also reducing the side B setback nonconformity by about 1/2 foot. And we're also reducing the rear setback nonconformity by another 1/2 foot. Next slide, please. Here is a site plan of the proposed structure compared to the current structure. Eileen Graff here, who's the architect for the project, will be able to go into more detail about this if anyone has any questions. We can go to the next slide. All right, and here we have the proposed floor plans of the structure. Here we have the first, second floor and roof plan. Next slide, please. And here are the proposed exterior elevations. You can see the structures lifted to comply with the floodplain requirements. And then next slide, please. As I'm sure this board is very well aware, here we have our zoning ordinance kind of criteria. So this is from section 21G4A. The board needs to determine whether the proposed changes are substantially more detrimental than the existing structure to the neighborhood or the PIOD. It's, in our opinion, it is not, for the following reasons. It is continuing to be a 2-bedroom single-family home. It's reducing the footprint and the impact on the lot. Again, reducing that footprint from 635 square feet to 560. It's moving the house about 6 feet back from the street, which eliminates that front setback nonconformity, moves it away from the side B lot line and the rear lot line, reducing those 2 nonconformities. It's actually reducing lot coverage of the existing structure from 16.9% to 15.1%. It elevates the home to the preferred standards for the flood zone, which speaks directly to the purpose of the PIOD, which largely revolves around flood resiliency and safety posed by structures in the flood zone, and it maintains compliance with all other dimensional requirements. We've also submitted 5 letters of support from neighbors immediately adjacent to this property. And with that, I will turn it over to the board to see if they have any questions, or the public for that matter.
Maybe before you do that, Libby, Eileen, could you go through the architectural drawings, please?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So as you can see from these drawings, it's a rather compact design. It's roughly square, just shy of 24 by 24. You can see the 24 length runs parallel with 58th Street. And then it's just shy of 24 with a dimension of 23 feet 4 for the direction, the perpendicular direction, with 2 staircases exiting that first floor level. And then as you travel up to the second floor, it's a reduced footprint of the living space. And it has a second floor deck area as shown above this second floor plan. And then you can travel up to the top floor. They will have a motorized sky hatch to access the top roof deck for some outdoor living space up above to benefit with the elevation and get some great views of the basin and towards the ocean. And then maybe slide to the exterior elevations. Great. So the front, the top left drawing is the front elevation. If you were standing on 58th Street and looking to the house, again, by elevating the building, we allow the opportunity for parking to be underneath. And then you could see the two staircases for exiting and the subsequent roof decks on the various levels. As far as materials, we are proposing shingles on that lower level and some vertical boarding on the second level. They will be some steel brackets to help with the overhangs, and then windows 2/1 as you see, and everything compliant on the lower level in regards to what's allowable for that floodplain. It's completely open, no skirting around the perimeter of the base. So as you see it on this elevation, and if you travel to the other three, you can see that it's open all below. Also complying with the floodplain, we are elevating on the back of the house. We're elevating the condenser and the generator. So you will see that also hung from the building. But with that, and there it is on that right side of that elevation. And this is the elevation that faces the basin. And then if you want to scroll through the other two, just for a quick look. There you go from the rear. So this is the back side of the property. And then this elevation would be the one that would be facing Northern Boulevard, if you will. So that is a quick description of the design of the residence. Again, it's a very compact and very efficient design of 1,055 square feet. And in this, in the calculations for the FAR, again, are including the existing shed that is on the property. And with that, I will pass it back to either Libby or the board.
This is Libby. I think we can go right to the board.
Okay, thank you, Libby. This is Chairman Rob Ciampetti again. Having heard from the applicant on presentation, and thank you for that detail to everyone, we will close that portion of the public hearing and go to public comment. Anyone who wishes to speak in support or in opposition or just simply speak, you'll see instructions for public comment up on the Zoom screen at this point, just outlining exactly what we ask every member of the public to do. If you are interested in speaking, just please on the bottom right, indicate so by raising your hand and we will unmute your mic. And again, we ask that you give your name and address so that our keeper of the minutes can record that. I see Attorney Bacher, I see your hand up, but I don't know if that's an error, whether you wish to speak further. Thank you. Okay, so anyone wishing to speak in support of or in opposition to or simply speak with respect to this application? Seeing no hands, going once, going twice. Still seeing no hands, we'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board. Members of the board posing questions to the applicant or any of the applicant's representatives. We'll start with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Could I ask again for just a review of the changes in square footage? I got, I think, a little confused on what the size was and what it's going to on the square footage size.
I can speak to that. This is Eileen Graff again. So the existing footprint, or sorry, first floor FAR. Do you mean square footage or total FAR?
Let's do square footage.
Square footage. So the existing house exists at 635 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the proposed house is 1,055.
Did that not get reduced to 976?
Sorry, where are you?
I'm just looking, it's from staff notes. I'm sorry. I just,
Oh, sorry. Yes, apologies. The FAR is 1055 minus the 79 for the shed.
got it. Okay.
Yes,
So that's where the number changes from the shed. Okay.
correct.
Any further questions, Mr. Moore?
That's it.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Delisle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions. Yeah, Ms. Graff, if you're still on the line, I'll pose the first one to you. I just wanted to ask you about the open first level, which I guess would be used for parking. Could you just sort of explain the concept of leaving that open?
The concept of leaving that open? Yeah, so often you'll see on Plum Island that sometimes you will see a skirting that happens around the building. And that is based on the floodplain in which you can have any type of enclosure, bottom of structure, etc. In this case, we cannot have anything lower than the bottom that we are showing. So we really are leaving just what's allowed, the 9 steel piles. And then of course, there's an exception for the access of the stairs. And then less the 3x3 square that allows utilities to come up from the ground to the building. So those are the only pieces that connect to the ground level.
Okay, so that's driven by regulation, not by architectural considerations.
Correct.
Okay, I was just curious. Okay, the second question is just again, I guess, Ms. Graff, following up on Mr. Moore's question. What's the square footage of the footprint on the first floor?
Is 560 square feet.
And then my last question, and maybe this is for you again, Ms. Graff, or maybe for Ms. Bowker. With regard, Andy, thank you for that. With respect to the setbacks, are those measured to include the overhanging generator or AC units that you referenced in the presentation?
I can address that. This is Libby Bowker. So no, they're not. They're as provided by the definitions in the Newburyport ordinance. They are measured to the building wall or the building line, which is where the wall face kind of hits the ground. Building line, which is Section 2B, says that all yard requirements are to be measured to the building line. So that's where the setbacks are calculated from, not the overhangs, which are elevated above that.
Okay, so those, for all intents and purposes, don't matter under the definition of the term in the NZO.
Correct.
Yeah, this is Andy Port, the director. Yeah, so the condenser equipment would fall in that same category. It's exempt from the setback. It's, because they're typically small pieces of equipment. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Let's see, Ms. Webb.
I'm not sure. Maybe this is a question for Ms. Graff. Our staff report indicates that the number of bedrooms is staying the same, but there are going to be 2 additional bathrooms. So how many bathrooms currently exist, and how many in addition to what exists will be built?
Sure. So currently there's 1 full bathroom in the existing residence. And then the new plan will actually have 2.5 bathrooms. So it's adding 1 full bath, but then on the top floor where there's living space, there's a powder room.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Swanton.
No, I don't have any questions. Mine have been addressed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shannon.
No additional questions. Ms. Webb asked what I was looking for. Thank you.
And Mr. Banovic?
No, I think everything's been addressed. I was looking at the FAR requirements, and it does seem like it's coming in under, and I looked around surrounding properties, and it seems to be within line. So I think that's kind of what I was looking for. I appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Banovic. And I feel the same way. I don't have any further questions other than the questions that have already been addressed, and I appreciate those. So we, without any further questions from the board, we'll close that portion of the public hearing and we'll move to deliberations. In deliberating this matter, the board, in considering a special permit for nonconformities, must make certain findings. The board must find that the proposed change being proposed by the applicant will not cause the structure to be within 10 feet of the side lot line, more than 2 stories or more than 35 feet in height. Those are the dimensional controls. As shown on the plan, it appears the new proposal will not be within 10 feet of the sidelines. The residence will be 2 stories and will be 31.5 feet in height. The board must also consider the application as to whether they believe that it will be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure or the PIOD. And when making this determination, we as a board are expected to consider factors such as size, scale, massing, and volume as compared to other structures in the neighborhood. So with that in mind, I'll go through our sort of roll call on deliberations of our board members, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Moore.
Mine will be brief, but in looking at this proposal and overlaying with the PIOD, it seems like a modest change. It keeps within the FAR, which, as we all know, is front and center out there. And while not a perfect number, something we can use as a guideline when determining more detrimental. Height requirements met. You're allowed to put another story on it. I think it's well done. It was well presented, and then with the letters of support, 4 letters of support of close abutters, I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just echo what Mr. Moore said. I have no problems with this. I'm glad it stays under the requirements for the FAR. I think that could have been an issue. But seeing what we have here based on the presentation and the materials submitted by the applicant, I can support this application.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb.
I concur with my colleagues and the points they've raised so far. I took a drive out there again this afternoon, and it's a very tight area. But I really appreciate seeing the drawings, the elevation drawings, so I can really get a sense for what is being proposed. I like that there is not an additional bedroom. This is a very rare proposal. Typically we see proposals from people wanting to build more bedrooms. But instead, this one is asking to build more bathrooms. And I don't think we've ever had this kind of conversation before at a ZBA meeting, but I would just note that with the increase of 1.5 baths, that there will be that increased water and sewer usage. So I just want to note that for the record.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have already said a lot of it. I can support this application. I'm particularly thankful for the way the applicant was extremely clear about their FAR calculation. And I think the other folks have already said my comments, so I can support this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. And though not voting this evening on these applications, we'll begin with Mr. Shannon and then Mr. Banovic. Mr. Shannon.
I agree with my colleagues. Great presentation. And again, I agree with previous comments. Fire calculation was clear and of course acceptable. So I could support this if I was indeed voting.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And Mr. Banovic.
Yeah, I'll make mine brief. I agree with I think Mr. Moore said it most succinctly, and I think they did a great job, and I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Banovic. And Rob Champetti here. I'll just say that I concur with everyone, and I really, really appreciate the very sensitive, sort of compact and efficient use of design. And to Eileen Graff's credit, though not surprising, this is a wonderful adaptation of this kind of use and structure on this size lot, and certainly as one voting member, I appreciate it. And it's a very aesthetic presentation and design as well. So it's well thought out, well presented by my view, and I agree with my colleagues on every other point that was made. So we can, unless there was anything further, and I don't see any hands on deliberations, we can close that portion of the public hearing, and we will move to the voting segment. And I will ask a member to make a motion.
This is Mark Moore. I'll make a motion to approve application 2020-074 for 758th Street, special permit for nonconformities.
All right, Mr. Moore's motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application is approved. Thank you very much to everyone and for your patience and your presentation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Members of the board.
Moving to the, before we move to the next application, I noticed a bit of a housekeeping matter in that we have an application that's at the end of our agenda, and out of courtesy to those that may be here to expecting to speak or comment with respect to this application, it's the last matter on our agenda. Sherry Evans and Andrew Rosen, care of Adam Costa, Mead, Tallerman and Costa LLC, on the matter of 6-8 Savory Street. It's an appeal of the zoning enforcement officer's determination. Docket 078 of 2020. The applicant has requested of the board that we continue that application to the meeting of December 8th. Attorney Mead or Attorney Costa, do you wish to be heard on the request to continue?
Mr. Chair, this is Lisa Mead. No, thank you. It speaks for itself, and we would request the board continue it.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. So we have a request for a continuance, and before we go any further, let's give courtesy to those that might be here on that matter and go ahead and take care of this. Do we have a motion to approve the continuance to the meeting of December 8th?
So moved, Mr. Moore.
Second that. Go ahead, Ms. Webb.
I'll second it.
All right, thank you. Motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Ms. Webb. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
And Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries, and the matter of 6-8 Savory Street is continued to 12-8. Thank you very much. And for those members in attendance that are here on that matter, this matter will be taken up and opened in full on the hearing of 12-8. Any questions, certainly you can pose to the planning office, Mr. Port or Ms. Sullivan. I would be happy to kind of add any additional detail that you might need. So moving to the next matter that is on our agenda, this is the application by Michael Gray for the property address of 12 Harrison Street. This is a special permit, a request for a written approval to authorize the removal of 3 walls resulting in demolition of over 25% within the demolition control overlay district, docket 075 of 2020. And we have as the presenters for this application, Misters David Mack, Dan Webb, Barry Gannick, and Michael Gray. May we hear from the applicant? Gentlemen.
Good evening. This is David Mack speaking. Can is my volume okay here?
We can hear you great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I haven't been before any of you before, so I appreciate the opportunity and the time. And I'll try to be as brief as possible because this is a project that you've seen before. And as I'll explain going forward, it's virtually identical to what you saw in May. With me, Mr. Webb has unfortunately had a family commitment that he cannot be here. Mr. Gannick is on the line and Mr. Gray is as well. So as noted, this is the address is 12 to 14 Harrison Street, but this is actually a one-family home that's being converted from a two-family home. Andy, can you skip to the next slide? Just a brief overview. This is in a residential neighborhood. It's in the R2 district. It's in the DCOD district, obviously. It's an old house. It was built somewhere in the late 18th century, early 19th century. It's not a historic property in the sense it's not registered on any historic list. As it was when it was purchased, it was in pretty rough shape. I think 60 people went through the house on when it was put on the market, and Mr. Gray and one other soul made offers, and Mr. Gray, nobody else did. It's on a pretty small lot. It's surrounded all by residential buildings. It's not near any businesses. It's all residential. If you could flip to slide 4, actually. Andy, this is what the property looked like when it was purchased. It's got vinyl siding. It had vinyl siding. It had a staircase in the back abutting the rail trail. And if you flip to the next slide, this is what it looked like a long time ago. So the way it was when Mr. Gray purchased it, it didn't really resemble what it looked like way back when. And many of the changes that have been made were made in the last 30 to 40 years, including making it a two-family, which obviously wasn't how it was originally, and some of the other features. So the Grays purchased it with the intent of really gutting it from the inside out. As I said, it was in very rough shape. The Grays hired Mr. Gannick as the architect, drew up plans, and the gist of the project, if you could flip to number 6, thank you, was to revert the pre-existing non-conforming two-family back to a one-family. A non-conformities permit was needed because it was raising the roof line. Proposed 3 feet, it ended up being about 18 inches, but still well below the height limit. I was going to restore the gambrel gable elevation, put clapboard siding to replace the vinyl siding, remove the exterior staircase that had been in the back, maintaining the existing footprint. They didn't expect to have to take down any of the exterior framing, nor did they want to. That's obviously much more complicated and extensive. All the interior work was allowed as of right. And indeed, if you look at the DCOD ordinance, it allows it doesn't even define demolition as removing siding. So in theory, you could take clapboard siding off and put vinyl siding on, and it wouldn't require any type of permit. But needless to say, they moved forward. We went to the historical commission, not under my regime. Mark Griffin was involved. He couldn't take it on in September, so I'm involved now. And they didn't expect to demolish anything, and therefore the only thing that was needed was a demolition non-conformities permit. Slides 7 through 12 show the plans. These are the exact same plans that were before the board in May. same design, same footprint, same exterior in every single respect. Mr. Gannick's here, Mr. Gray's here to answer questions about that, but nothing has changed from this standpoint. The plans are identical. The Newburyport Historical Commission recommended approval. They weren't particularly enamored with multiple roof decks. They took one off, and they were pleased with some of the historical restorations that were being proposed, including, as I mentioned, 2-to-1 family, removal of the staircase in the back, replacing the vinyl siding, restoring the gable, gambrel gable, and overall approved it. So we came back to this board approved the nonconformity special permit. We started construction, and when peeling back the wall board, and this is the procedural history. Thank you, Andy. So in June, the building permit was issued. He started working, and when peeling back the wall board, they noticed a ton of damage to the framing. Fire damage, flood and water damage. Noticed that it was not the original framing. It had been, a patchwork of really poor workmanship. So much so that it was a no-brainer in terms of a construction and structural standpoint that it had to come out. If you flip to slide 14, Andy, this is a photo showing some of the patchwork old framing with some notations showing that it was just not, it was not the original framing. It didn't appear to have historic significance, and it was really bad shape. So, although obvious, Mr. Gray, submitted opinions, afterwards, obviously, in slides 17 and 18 from Mr. Gannick and Mr. Webb, saying that, look, this framing just could not be saved. So Mr. Gray proceeded to take down some exterior framing, and if he could go back, he would have stopped and come back to the board. If you go back to, this shows some of the new framing that's in right now. If you go back to the previous slide, Mr. Port, number 15, it shows some new framing and old framing side by side. And really that is the totality of the difference of what we're talking about right now. Mr. Gray didn't appreciate at the time that that removal of exterior framing, although not visible from the street, although not structurally sound, and although not the original framing, it nonetheless triggered the demolition control overlay district ordinance, in that if you remove 25% or more of the walls, whether visible or not, any component of the walls, you need a demolition control overlay district special permit. So a zoning violation was issued. The project was demanded to be stopped. Mr. Gray, of course, complied immediately. And under the ordinance, the process is triggered where we speak to planning staff and decide what we need to do. And there were two things that arose. One is to under section 28E8, there are penalties imposed if you demolish, as it's defined in the ordinance, historic structure without the special permit, without approval of the zoning board. You can't get a building permit. Well, the building permit obviously was issued. So after conferring with the planning department, a decision was made to seek permission to continue with the project and sort of to resume the building permit that's been issued and resume the project. The other component of the request, what we're here before the board tonight, is it was decided that maybe out of an abundance of caution, we should get the actual special permit both in a retroactive respect in the sense that 25% or more of the exterior framing has been removed. It can't be replaced. It's just, it's gone. It wasn't salvageable to begin with, but also to the extent that there's 25% or more remaining to be removed, that we get that special permit. So if you could flip to slide 22, that's what we're here about tonight. And those are the two things. The request for written approval so that we don't have to endure the three-year moratorium on this project imposed under this section of the ordinance, and the issuance of a special permit under the ordinance to account for the removal of the framing that has occurred and what will need to be occurred. I'm not sure. We haven't done the specific measurements whether it exceeds 25%, but out of an abundance and caution, we'll assume that there still is 25% or more of the exterior framing remaining. Now, I will note that there's also an appeal pending that we hope we'll never have to get to, and we hope that will be mooted. But out of an abundance of caution, because you can't revive rights on appeal if they expire, we filed an appeal of the zoning enforcement violation, and we hope never to proceed on that. That's been continued to December and hopefully can be dismissed. So that's where we are. If you could flip to back a little bit to slides 19, 20, and 21. That's what the project looks like now. It's boarded up, it's tarped, it's unoccupied, it's obviously not attractive. It's in the middle of a residential neighborhood where many of the neighbors who are here on the call tonight have to look at it. They've undergone their own substantial renovations of these houses over the years. So that's where we are. So looking now at what needs to be done and the criteria, if you could flip to slide 23, Mr. Port, there's no standard under your ordinance under section 8 as to what should be looked at by the zoning board in determining whether to either waive or relax the 3-year moratorium. The DCOD special permit standard is well defined, or it's defined anyway. I think it's well defined. So turning to those criteria, let me take them in order. And these are submitted in writing in detail what our arguments are, but for the approval, I think from the standpoint of, well, where do we go from here? Imposing a 3-year moratorium in this circumstance where literally the only thing that has changed from the project that was presented in May is the framing, the replacement of old but not original, structurally unsound, rotted framing that's not visible from the street. That is the only change. There's no change in design, no change in the improvements from a historical perspective that were a part of the project originally remain. I get it. I was on the planning board in Beverly for 12 to 15 years. And there were occasions where, the project went forward and changes were made in the field that shouldn't have been. The applicants came back and asked for permission, so to speak, after the fact. It's not ideal. I get it. Mr. Gray has already suffered. The 3 months have already expired. The project has been delayed. He's obviously incurred a substantial expense of sort of reapplying and getting these applications in front of this board. And under these circumstances, all the neighbors want to see the project proceed. They've all, many have submitted letters. Many are on the phone tonight. So I think under these circumstances, given that there really is no identifiable historic significance of the framing itself, and that all of the other aspects of the project, including the entire gutting of the interior, is allowed as of right, and was previously approved, and where it really isn't necessary based on, in the opinions of the architect and the engineer, that the framing come out and be replaced in order to have a safe, sound project, we would request that the board grant the approval and give the approval for the building permit to be reinstated. As for the other aspect of our request, the DCOD special permit, the standard as identified on the screen is where a building or structure retains no substantial remaining market value or reasonable use, taking into account the cost of rehabilitation to meet the requirements of the building code, et cetera, et cetera. And I think here, the building or structure is not the entire building. The aspect that triggered this approval is just the framing. That is the only thing that is being changed from what has been approved. And the opinion of the professionals is that there's no option here really to do anything other than what Mr. Gray did, albeit if he could go back, he'd stop it, but he would have stopped and asked for permission. But you've seen from the photos, there's no, it's new framing versus old framing. It's sound newer wood versus older wood that's deteriorated and rotting. So we would request that the board make the specific finding and issue the special permit so that the project can proceed and the project can be completed, which will improve the neighborhood substantially. And again, the alternative is to let this project sit idle for up to 3 years while an appeal proceeds. And then when we get to 3 years, what then? Someone's going to have to do something with this building. And we would submit that it doesn't really, it doesn't achieve the intent and goal of the ordinance to keep this on ice, so to speak, for 3 years. Certainly the ordinance envisioned that this could happen, and it's unfortunate. We expect the historical commission, I know we met with them. They're not happy. I don't expect them to be happy. I would not be surprised if when they finally make their report, it's going to be, they're going to come down hard. But again, I don't think the alternative of just halting this is the way to go. I don't think it's good for anybody, including from a historical perspective. So that's my presentation. Mr. Gray is here. Mr. Gannick is here to answer any questions, as am I. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the board.
All right. This is Chairman Ciampetti again, and Attorney Mack, thank you very much for the detail of that presentation. It's very helpful to have the procedural history as well, knowing, as the board members fully know, that this is a request for a DCOD special permit after the fact, as it were. Okay, so closing that portion of the presentation, I will now open the hearing to comments from the public. And you need not speak necessarily in support or opposition by label. You can simply speak. And if you could just simply raise your hand, and we will open your mic and recognize you one at a time. We do ask that you keep your comments limited to 2 minutes per person so that everyone has an opportunity. Let's see, we have Mr. Richards, Chairman of the Newburyport Historic Commission. Andy, why don't we unmute Chairman Richards' mic, and we'll start there.
Yeah, I think I am unmuted. Thank you. Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street, and as Ms. Ciampetti noted, Historical Commission Chair. Just a couple quick clarifications. First of all, there was two contradictory statements in Mr. Mack's presentation about it was, quote, not registered on a list of historical properties, but then on a later slide noted that it is on the district data sheet as a contributing property, and it does have a Form B written up by the Mass Historical Commission. So I just wanted the board, your board, to be clear that, yeah, it is a noted historical property. It's a contributing property. So I just wanted to be clear on that. There was also something in the presentation that there was no standard in the ordinance as to how to relieve that 3-year moratorium. But Andy Port, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there in the ordinance there was a reference to written approval or decision or something from the Historical Commission could be used to how should I put it? Get over that allow a demolition permit or some kind of building permit before the 3-year period. Is that correct?
That's correct. Their applicants asked for 2 things to be considered by the Zoning Board of Appeals here. One is the Demolition Control Overlay District Special Permit. That's the typical permit process. The other one is this essentially an after the fact approval where work was done inconsistent with the ordinance, but permission is requested to move ahead for whatever reason is posited. And then the board would have to issue permission, presumably similarly asking for input from the Historic Commission.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I want to try to not take up too much time here. Just to the board, just so you may already know this, but if not, the Historical Commission is meeting this Thursday evening, and this matter is on our agenda. There's a draft report, but it's pretty clear that it's not the final version. It needs to be gone over, and it's not. I don't know how the board will, where we'll end up with that after we've deliberated on it. So that we'll have to just wait until after we meet on Thursday night. But it is on our agenda, so it would just have to wait for that particular thing. I think one of the things. I sort of have 2 questions and a comment. I'll make the comment first, and I don't think a member of the public can exactly ask questions. So I'll just put the questions out there, and then if the board finds them relevant, you can answer. The one is actually an important question to the board for me. So anyway, the comment is just that, what disincentive is there in the future for a developer to do this kind of thing again if there's essentially no penalty? So that's the comment. The question for the applicant that you can ask if you find it relevant is, how is it possible, given everything that was said about the existing conditions before anything was done, that no structural survey was done at all, apparently, to determine if the existing structure was going to be sound enough to support the changes to the roof and all that? It seems almost beyond comprehension that no one bothered to check to see if that structure was okay first. And then finally, my question to you, the board, is, I know we are charged with providing you with a historical report. And I was just wondering if there's anything beyond that that you would like to try to get from the Historical Commission, any either additional information or opinion. So if you can give me any feedback on that, that'd be great. That's that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Richards. And again, this is Rob Ciampetti. I believe we, of course, and for members of the ZBA, just to take a quick momentary pause as we move through this segment of the application. It is evident, and it's become palpably so, having heard from Chairman Richards, that this board has sort of an incomplete dossier of information. And by that, I mean that critical to our decision-making process is not only the presentation, of course, the background research by the planning department, to their credit, who have done a nice job putting together this material, as well as comments from the public, which we are in the process of soliciting and will hear every one of, but also the feedback and advisory opinion from our sister commission, the Newburyport Historic Commission, who under the DCOD provide us advisory opinion, counsel, and guidance. And so in that, it's obvious that we do not yet have that. It is something that the board, in my opinion, should have. And I would be fairly insistent that we do have, though though we are in the process of eliciting public comment, I'm equally insistent that we will complete that process so that we hear everything that there is to be said by all those that are in attendance who wish to speak. But with the benefit of understanding that we as a board may, at the conclusion of that, have to make a decision to continue this matter so that the Newburyport Historic Commission can complete their work in deliberating on these matters, distilling it down to some form of opinion and or advisory. To answer your question, Mr. Chairman, on what this board would need, we would certainly seek to have every bit of the council advice and advisory opinion of the expertise of the Newburyport Historic Commission. I think that serves the spirit of the intent of the DCOD and us having our sister board of the Historic Commission counsel us and provide advice. Though not binding, it's critical and expert. So we look very, we would look very carefully at you and your colleagues having all the time you need to give us the best possible intel, as it were. So with that, I just wanted to qualify what we will do in proceeding with the completion of public comment and let those that are here in attendance know, as well as the members of the board, procedurally that we do not, in my opinion, yet have all that we need. I certainly will elicit comment and opinions from my colleagues on the board to make sure I'm in the majority in that thinking before we proceed to entertain a continuance. But without deliberating further on that, let's continue the public comment portion, and we'll go to the next individuals that wish to be heard. And I do see hands from Attorney Mack, and we will certainly circle back to you, Attorney Mack. I'm just going to go through those.
I just wanted to make one comment if I could.
Sure.
And that I didn't intend mean to, by having this hearing start tonight, it was not the intent of Mr. Gray to try to jam through this application without the Historic Commission completing its review. We just wanted to start the process so that we could move forward, and expecting that the board would likely continue it to the next meeting to complete the hearing. So I didn't want to suggest that we're trying to jam this through. We know that the Historic Commission is not done, but we just ask that we start the process knowing that we can accomplish a lot in this night and leave less for the second night.
I appreciate that, Attorney Mack, and I think that is a shared sentiment, certainly by me, and I would be surprised if it wasn't by my colleagues. We endeavor to get the process underway and move forward in earnest.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I see the hand of Mr. Coulter-John. Andy, if we can unmute Mr. Coulter-John's mic and hear from you. Tom, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
We can, sir.
Thank you. Tom Coulter-John, 64 Federal Street, co-president of the Newburyport Preservation Trust. The Newburyport Preservation Trust strongly opposes this special permit application. The applicant's appeal for already violating the building permit and violating Newburyport zoning has not even been heard. In addition, the Newburyport Historical Commission is still reviewing their historical report to help advise you. This evening's hearing, therefore, seems premature and out of sequence. Having said that, the trust takes issue with numerous assertions made by the applicant and their paid-for reports. The applicants demolished a historic building without permission. The submitted report by their structural engineer is after the fact and paid for by them. Had they followed the proper procedure, the ZBA would have had the opportunity to request an independent evaluation. Members of the public could have encouraged such a report at a public hearing, but were denied that opportunity. The submitted photos presented in support of demolition give a lopsided view of the situation and are far from conclusive. Several of the photos clearly show what looks like viable heavy framing that could have been saved in place. Personally, I've done such work on my own home. I firmly believe a skilled restoration team familiar with working on 18th century historic homes could have saved much of this building. One of the most common repairs in Newburyport is to repair sections of sill beams which rest upon the foundation and support the frame. Another typical repair is to the bottoms of corner posts. Countless Newburyport homeowners have done this work themselves or had carpenters do the repair. The applicant did none of these. '18th century timber framed houses were largely overbuilt, and this is one of the reasons they have lasted so long. Typical modern repairs include augmenting or increasing existing framing when needed rather than demolition by replacement. The applicant in slide 14 notes no header or jack studs or king studs by the windows, etc. All these could easily be added prior to window replacement. Spacing of the studs can easily be augmented to meet the code. None of these are reasons to demolish a historic building. The applicants demolished a historic building without permission. They state that the building at one point had fire damage. That's true, but most 18th century houses in Newburyport have had fires at one time or another. All of them, of course, heated with wood, but most buildings survive to this day. The trust respectfully requests that the Zoning Board of Appeals deny this application. The DCOD is clear and the penalty is clear. The applicants have demolished an important 18th century historic building protected under the law, and the delay of a building permit should continue. This is a stunning instance of demolition caught by the city. If the owners are allowed to simply proceed, then more demolitions will surely follow. After the fact permitting and waived penalties will not help us to preserve our precious heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coulter John. We have Josh Weiss with a hand up. And Andy, if we can unmute Mr. Weiss's mic. Mr. Weiss, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for taking the time to hear our public comments. I do not have a pre-written statement, as was the previous speaker, but I would like to speak on behalf of those of us that live on this street and are raising our families here. As you all know, we live in Newburyport because we admire the town itself, and coming with that is the historical nature of the buildings.
Mr. Weiss, may I interrupt you just to ask you to state your address for
I'm sorry about that. I live at 13 Harrison Street. Have been there for 18 years. My front door is approximately 25 feet from 12 Harrison Street.
Thank you, sir. Please continue.
You're welcome. Sorry. You've seen the pictures of what this structure looks like now, and I would like to really stress that extending any sort of moratorium on building will greatly and adversely affect those of us that actually live here. I'm very familiar with the building across the street. I've attended all the hearings that that have been able to be attended, and this structure is being substantially improved in my from what I can see. The vinyl siding that's been removed and all the substantial investment in the property. While I understand there have been some egregious removal of interior framing, I cannot understand how this would be equated with the demolition of a historic house. And to continue this for 3 years while those of us live here and have to put up with the delay, I feel to be completely unjustified. And I would like to stress that the board take into account those of us that live here, that love this street, and support the fact that we have a new member of the neighborhood that is investing a substantial amount of money to improve one of these structures. There are approximately, well, actually, I think exactly 10 children that live on this street that are under the age of 14, that ride their bikes and play on the street. And for us to put up with this building in the current state of that it's in, I feel is completely unfair and unjust. Thank you for hearing my comments, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Moving down the list, I see the hand up of a Mr. Mark Donovan. Andy, we can unmute Mr. Donovan's mic, and Mr. Donovan, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you for allowing me to voice my thoughts and opinion on this matter. I appreciate the hard work that you all do on the board, and having the opportunity as a member or a citizen of Newburyport is important. So my name is Mark Donovan. I live at 17 Harrison Street. I too live in very close proximity to the Gray's property. Josh Weiss just said, I think, what a lot of us on the street feel and importantly are feeling and witnessing, especially in a time where we're burdened with being relatively closed to what we can do, right, during this pandemic. And what we have now is a project where we all envisioned and we do believe what will be a improvement to the structure that existed before the Grays initiated their construction. And so I just want to appeal to the betterment of, or what I think would be the betterment of the city, to the residents on this street, to the numerous people who utilize the rail trail, and to common sense, in hopes that we can move forward with a constructive outcome here. I understand that Mr. Coltajon is passionate. He certainly had a very spirited few minutes there of comments. But I would absolutely argue whether or not he had the opportunity to inspect the property. It sounds like he had a lot of strong opinions about the exactness of the property, but I doubt he actually has inspected it. So I don't know that it is worthy of dismissing everything he said, but until there's a true inspection and real facts, I just want to counter his opinion there. And I do think that those of us who have been in the neighborhood for a long period of time and have witnessed the structure that existed before and are privy to the plans for where it is going, I think it's an improvement overall. I do question definitionally and structurally whether or not the integrity of this building from a historical point of view is really being damaged. So I'll close with that, and I hope that the common sense can prevail here, and there can be some sensitivity around those of us who have been living with this eyesore for too long right now, and we can get on and really find a way to agree and make for a better environment for all of us.
Okay, was that the extent of your comments, Mr. Donovan?
That is, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, I see a Mary Jean Clavin with her hand up. Andy, if you can unmute Ms. Clavin's mic, and Ms. Clavin, you have the floor.
Good evening, all. I am here with my husband, John. We are residents of 8 Harrison Street, and support the comments of our neighbors and don't want to take time to repeat them, but feel strongly that we support also the due diligence of the city of Newburyport and all of the volunteers involved. We are extremely cognizant of the work that needs to be done to preserve that which can and should be preserved in the city. I also will just say as a side note that I did grow up in Newburyport and am one of those who sees many of the improvements made to structures and areas of the city, to be a terrific improvement for all the residents. And I realize, Mr. Ciampetti, that you do not have all the information you need to make a decision this evening, but making this a longer and drawn out process so that there is a consequence for someone in the future does seem pretty out of balance with what has gone on and at 12 Harrison Street and what could potentially happen in the future.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Clayton. And seeing, let's see, we have a hand up by a screen named Solar Ivy, and I apologize if I'm not capturing the correct name, but Andy, if we could go ahead and unmic Solar Ivy. The floor is yours.
Oh, hi, good evening. This is actually George Solari. I'm here with my wife, Ivy. Can you hear us?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to keep it real short. I don't want to repeat, although we support what the other occupants in the neighborhood and on the street. We are at 4 Harrison Street. We've been here about a year and we're very happy with Newburyport and our move from Florida. But I just want to make a following and a hand up for a support for the neighborhood, for the community. We really do like Newburyport. We really appreciate this opportunity to share with you our feelings on this and just say that we too have had some new siding put on recently, and there was some findings of unexpected beetle rot in the framing that was taken care of. So it's not uncommon, as I'm sure everybody on the phone knows, to find unexpected, but it's what you do with it. And that was the way we approached our house, was that we plan to be here a very long time. It's my understanding that the Grays plan on being here a long time. We've seen a lot of properties being purchased, being redone and then sold, which I have no problem with. But when the intentions seem to be legitimate for improving the neighborhood as ours, I do take that into account under the circumstance, and how to move forward is always the way to solve a problem. And take the past, learn from it, and try to incorporate what's best for the entire community. So with that, I support everybody's decision who's on this phone, who's been involved with Newburyport a lot longer than we have. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to share those comments with you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I see a hand up by Miss Stephanie Nikitich. Andy, if we could go ahead and unmute Miss Nikitich's mic. And Miss Nikitich, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephanie Nikitich, 93 High Street. This application repeats and relies on the applicant's appeal claim that he just did not know demolishing exterior walls requires a permit. In a letter to you dated May 19th, 2020, also presented to the NHC, he said through his attorney, Mark Griffin, that his proposal will not trigger the requirements for a DCOG special permit. The demolition threshold was not reached, as no exterior building walls are being demolished. I understand that before the official stop work order from the building department during a foundation inspection, former Deputy Building Commissioner Bob Armstrong orally ordered that exterior wall demolition stop, but it didn't. So the honest mistake claim is not credible. Also, there is the serious question if you can make the required finding of fact after the fact, and based not on substantial evidence, but photographs and a belated structural report from one of the applicant's own contractors. These issues were discussed by the Historical Commission during their advisory review, but as you noted, you do not yet have their final report. I hear the neighbors. I'm sympathetic with what they're going through. But in the broader public interest, I ask that you do not allow zoning enforcement to be circumvented and wrongful demolition to be rewarded with an after-the-fact special permit approval, and that you do not waive the construction moratorium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nikotich. I see the hand of Mr. Donald Flanders. Andy, if we could go ahead and unmute Mr. Flanders' mic. And Mr. Flanders, you have the floor, sir.
And Donald, you'll need to unmute on your end as well.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, sir. Thank you.
Okay. As I mentioned, I live at 296 Water Street, not far from Harrison. I've lived here almost 20 years, and my mother built the original house here almost 50 years ago. So I've been roaming the neighborhood for an awful long time. And I just want to reinforce what I heard from several of the neighbors on Harrison Street. I've noticed just the transformation over the years of people investing a lot of money in beautifying their homes and remodeling. And the street is, I think, one of the more impressive streets now in the South End. And I was delighted when I saw that someone had purchased the property at 12 Harrison. It definitely seemed like it needed some tender loving care with the siding and the foundation, and that the staircase, I think it went to a second story level. You could see from the rail trail, it looked like that was not a very sturdy structure. Anyway, I was just delighted that someone wanted to sink money into our neighborhood. And from what I had read, they wanted to live here, not spin it out, as someone had mentioned. And I understand that something that the internal structure, and that's beyond my capability, but just from willingness of someone to choose Newburyport from another city to invest a lot of money to buy that, and I'm sure a heck of a lot of money to renovate it, and to see what it looks like now and to walk by it. I support the neighbors on Harrison Street that I hope a remedy other than seeing the condition of that house for any great length of time. I hope there's another remedy, and if there is, I would support it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flanders, for your comments. Seeing the final two hands raised, I note Attorney Mack and Mr. Gray. We haven't heard from Mr. Gray, so I'll recognize Mike Gray, and you have the floor, sir.
Is that okay?
Yeah. I can say.
Yeah.
Yes, hi, it's Mike Gray. I appreciate you allowing me to speak. I just wanted to make a couple corrections. I'm not a developer. I am the owner. And yes, I did make the mistake, mine solely, to take down the framing, assuming that it wasn't the original framing. I didn't realize that anybody would have an issue with it, and sadly mistaken. And then the other correction I need to make is that there was never any knowledge to me that the building inspector had put a stop work order on. I got a notice from the building inspector when the stop work order was issued, and we stopped. During the foundation inspection, one of my employees was present who stood the inspection, and he approved the inspection, and that was that. There was never anything said about stopping work. So I just felt like I had to make those corrections.
Okay. Was there anything else, Mr. Gray?
Nope. I'll let Mr. Mack take it.
All right, thank you, sir. And Attorney Mack, I believe you are the last hand standing, as they say.
For tonight, anyway, right? So I'm going to be brief. I understand the sentiment that, well, we need to address the fact that if the penalty, the maximum penalty is not imposed, then all applicants are going to run roughshod over the ordinance and just plow ahead and seek forgiveness later. I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the important work that the Historical Commission and the Preservation Trust play in property governance and enforcement of the zoning rules. But I think there's some proportionality that needs to be considered here. I appreciate that. I mean, it's a heavy penalty, and I would submit that Mr. Gray has already suffered quite a bit from a financial standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from not being able to move forward with the project. And there are many times where I've seen neighbors completely opposed to the project because the proponent is seeking to, fit a square peg in a round hole or expand and really make something that doesn't fit into the neighborhood. This is universally supported by the neighborhood, and I appreciate that this is an old building and that there's a purpose to the statute, but I also think some proportionality needs to be considered. There's a 3-year moratorium, but why is that the penalty as opposed to 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, 3 months? It's a very, very, very harsh penalty, not just to the Grays, but to the city and to the neighborhood, most importantly. So I understand all the comments, but I think that I just reiterate that he's suffered a significant penalty. Finally, the one comment I would say about, I think it was to the initial comments about this being out of order. I don't think it serves anyone to have to go forward with the appeal of a zoning violation and then potentially litigation to determine the validity of the zoning violation, and then to return years and thousands of dollars of time and money, having been spent on court processes, when it seems like a more practical solution makes sense. And, I make a living as a litigator, but this is not a situation where I think it makes sense to wait to resolve this until the appeal can be heard. I think the opposite should be taken, to avoid litigation if possible. And that's why we've continued the appeal and hope to never reach it, because it's a significant undertaking, not just for Mr. Gray, but for the city, which will have to deal with, litigation, and that's in no one's interest here. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you, Attorney Mack. And the last hand that I see up is still Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, is that just an error, or do you wish to be heard further?
No, my mistake. I apologize.
Very good. Thank you, sir. And thank you to everyone. Seeing no further hands, thank you to every member of the public who's taken your thoughtful and careful and detailed time to share your comments with members of the board. In this somewhat unique circumstance, it's critical for we as a volunteer administrative board to elicit all of the information we can. In that spirit, and as the chairman, I am going to go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing. And as I alluded to earlier, further in the spirit of what I believe to be my role as the chairman, as well as the spirit of obtaining all of the information there is to be had, so that we may weigh it all in our best efforts to try to arrive at a sensible and a thoughtful and logical conclusion as a board. I am going to propose that, by way of a motion, that this board consider suspending the application for the moment and continuing it to such time, and I believe we have a date, so as to allow for the Newburyport Historic Commission's advisory work to continue and hopefully conclude with some resulting advisory opinion, input, or further information. And to just point out, there is great gravity to this application, both for and against. The gravity is that we as a city and as members of a volunteer board serving on the Zoning Board of Appeals and other boards and commissions, we all sort of participate in the fabric that becomes the result in our community: historic preservation, development, thoughtful growth, smart growth, and everything in between is all included in that alchemy of administrative work. And so, in the spirit of aspiring to the best possible result, I think it's wise for we as a board to recognize that it's a factual finding here that has yet to be proven, but it's to just demonstrate that assuming it is proven that there was a demolition beyond the scope of the ZBA approval, and it appears that there was, but just to lay out the mechanics of the code, the Newburyport zoning ordinance under section 28E8 imposes a 3-year moratorium. Now, there are two boards that bear the authority and discretion to relieve, attenuate, modify, or completely absolve or enforce that moratorium. One is the Newburyport Historic Commission, and through its advisory, the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. So before we endeavor into that gravity of a result, having heard passionately from members of the abutting community and neighborhood in particular, as well as stakeholders with the Newburyport Preservation Trust and others, I think it's in our best interest as a board to entertain a motion to continue, allow the Newburyport Historic Commission to complete their work, to render some further advice, and to revisit this with the benefit of all of the, as they say, news fit to print. So with that, and as the chair, I'm going to make a motion for the consideration of my colleagues that the board consider suspending the further progress of the application, having concluded public comment, but deferring questions from the board and deliberations to the meeting of December 8th, which I believe will give enough time. And Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, is that sufficient time to allow the Newburyport Historic Commission to have their meeting and complete? I guess you wouldn't be able to say whether it's enough time for them to complete their work, but will they at least have time to meet?
Yes, that's definitely the case. They will be able to meet, and I do believe that they should be able to do so prior to that time.
Okay, so in the event that we find that that's not the case, this board can undertake, further a further continuance to allow for the intent, at least the intent of my motion anyway, assuming it meets with the approval of the board. Okay, so I'll make a motion to continue, I'm sorry, actually, as chair, I can't make a motion. I will invite a member of the ZBA to undertake my thoughts and present a motion to continue the application to the meeting of December 8th. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, it's Rachel Webb. I just want to call your attention to our staff report, which mentioned a continuation to the meeting of November 24th, not the December 8th meeting.
I heard that, but I heard from the chair of the Historic Commission, and correct me if I misunderstood that. I thought that it sounded as though their meeting won't have concluded. I don't know. Am I mistaken? Is that going to give them enough time?
This is Andy and Rachel. I understand that we had noted that in the staff report. I think based on where things are right now, the 8th would probably make more sense because the Historic Commission is meeting again to discuss this Thursday. It would be nice to see if a advisory opinion comes out of that particular meeting, but if the commission needed any more time, continuing this hearing to the 8th would make sure that the commission can finish that process.
Okay, whatever.
Well, I mean, so my thoughts notwithstanding, Ms. Webb, I mean, if you feel the members of the board may make whatever motion, if any motion, they feel is appropriate, under the circumstances. I'm just trying to afford the additional time by suggestion that that would give us a more complete body of material from the Historic Commission so that we can continue and hopefully conclude.
Right, if they're meeting this week, though, I would think they could, I don't know. I would make a motion to propose to continue it to the meeting of November 24th.
Okay, do we have so a motion's been made to continue the application to the meeting of the 24th. Do we have a second? Going once, going twice. Seeing no hands in second, the motion fails to move to a vote. So Ms. Webb, it looks like there's no members are presenting to second that motion. Do you wish to revisit your motion or?
Sure, I'll make a motion to continue to the zoning board meeting of December 8th.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Webb. The motion is now represented by Ms. Webb to continue the matter to the meeting of December 8th. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Moore.
All right, motion's made by Ms. Webb and seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
And Rob Ciampetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application is continued to the meeting of December 8th. And to all of those members of the public and applicants alike and representatives, thank you for your time and your patience and your thoughtful comment. We will look forward to continuing this on December 8th. Moving to the next matter on our agenda, we have the application of 159 Water Street. This is the application of Nicholas Hansis, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa. The application address 159 Water Street, a special permit for nonconformities, docket 076 of 2020, to raise the roof on a rear 1.5-story addition and make it a 2nd-story space on a pre-existing non-conforming structure. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of Nick Hansis, who is the purchaser of this property. As the chair said, this is a request for special permit to modify pre-existing non-conforming structure. Andy, if you could go to the first slide, please. So many of you will be familiar with this property. If you drive down Water Street at all, it is the property that is immediately adjacent to the entrance to the wastewater treatment plant in the city. It is located in the WMD district. And the proposal is to renovate the structure, which needs some loving care, and then raise the 1.5-story rear addition so that it is a full 2-story addition. In addition, there will be some relocation of windows, but other than that, there is no proposal to modify the structure itself. If I could go to the next slide, please. So this structure has an interesting history. We've been before the Historic Commission already, who has already approved our plans. It was built, the original structure was built around 1850, which is the front part of the structure. Then there was a later added middle addition and then a later added end addition. And it's the end addition we are proposing to modify. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-story structure, 1,620 square feet of living area, very low ceilings. The property is complicated. It's in the WMD, the DCOD, as well as the AE zone. The rear part of the property dips down towards the river. It's immediately adjacent to the sewer treatment plant, as I suggested. It's pre-existing non-conforming for lot area, lot coverage, frontage, front and side yard setbacks. The parking for the property is actually located on an easement adjacent to it. And the structure and property otherwise complies as it were to the dimensional requirements. If you can go to the next slide, please. So here's the property you all might remember. So if you see the lower level of that roof in the back, that's the proposal to go up to be to the same height as the existing front of the structure. Next slide, please, Andy. And this is the front of the structure. And the next slide. And then you have the east side of the structure. That's if you were traveling towards downtown on Water Street. And the next slide. And here's one of the side views of the east side a little closer. And next slide. And this is the westerly side, or the side that's adjacent to the sewer treatment plant where the entry is. And you can see this rear 1.5-story addition, which we're proposing to go up on, which is the reason that roof line change was the reason for the the Historic Commission demo review. And the next slide, please, Andy. And then here's a further away view of the westerly side of the property. So the next slide, please. So here's the existing first floor footprint. That footprint is not going to change. How it's used will change. One of the things that we're going to note is that because it's in the 8E zone, the work that's going to be done is to take, part of the work is going to be to take all of the mechanicals out of the basement and put them in the attic. Next slide, please, Andy. Again, this is the existing second floor footprint floor plan. And the next slide, please. And here's the existing front elevation on your right and the existing rear elevation. Again, on that rear elevation, that's what we're changing. And go to the next slide, please. And here we have the existing side. So you can see that that board in the middle of the structure that separates the first and second addition, and then the third addition is the end. And next slide, please. These also show the elevation changes, the topography changes toward the river from Water Street as it goes back. And the next slide, please, Andy. So the idea is to renovate the dilapidated structure, raise the rear portion of the roof, relocate some windows, and then not have any other alterations. And the next slide, please. And here's a table which shows exactly what's happening of the existing conditions. So as you can see, the WMD requires, oh, that R2 is incorrect. We're sorry about that. The WMD requires 10,000 square feet of area, and there is 2,963 square feet in the actual property. The frontage is 31.93, where 90 feet are required. And the height is 25 required, and we have 20 feet. The lot coverage is 33.5. The open space is 64.9. The front setback is 0.2 feet. That's not changing. Neither of the side setbacks are changing at 4.3 or 8.65. The rear setback is 40.3. That's not changing. And of course, the FAR does not apply here. And next slide, please. So here's the footprint of the house. And you can see what we're doing in the rear of the property, just going up. So we're exacerbating the side setbacks. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Andy. So here was the demo plan that was used, but again, you can see nothing's happening to the front. In the rear, you can see that gable end is being removed on the addition on the rear. And then a new addition is going to be on top of that. And you go to the next slide, please, Andy. And here are the window changes on this elevation along with the replacement of those window locations. And the next slide, please, Andy. And so here again on the left side elevation or the west elevation, you can see the changes in the window locations. Largely, it's a result of those window locations because of the change of use on the inside of the building to what currently exists. Next slide, please, Andy. And here's the floor plan. So what's happening is the bedrooms are going to be located on the first floor as opposed to the second floor, and the actual living space will be on the second floor. So we have 2 bedrooms and bathrooms and entryways on the first floor. Next slide, Andy. And then on the proposed second floor plan, you can see we have a family room out front towards Water Street and the living space of the kitchen in the rear. And what you see, the new living space is a half bath, essentially in a pantry. And in that pantry is a hatch to the attic, which is where the mechanicals are going to go. The other part of that addition on the rear that's being changed is it's actually going to become a balcony so that there's some outdoor space and a view over to the river, since the grass area in the back is pretty close to the sewer treatment plant facilities. And the next slide, please, Andy. So here's what the proposed front elevation is. As you can see, it's absolutely the same as it is today. And then the proposed rear elevation. You'll see the difference in materials. One of the things that's important when you have additions on original structures is to somehow differentiate the new from the old. Given that the height is so small, the architect is proposing the differentiation being in siding materials. So the newer additions in the rear are going to have clapboards, and the front is going to have the siding, cedar siding. And the next slide, please, Andy. And again, you can see the addition on the rear that's being proposed. And actually, this actually also has the flood vents added into it. And the next slide, please, Andy. And again, this is the west side elevation. So you can see this is the differentiation of the original structure. We're using that board in the middle, the corner board in the middle, to differentiate the newer from the oldest, shall we say. And the next slide, please, Andy. So under 9B2A, the board needs to make two findings. One, that there will be not any new nonconformities. And in this instance, there will only be the exacerbation of the side yard setbacks with the upward extension. And that the changes will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure. Here, the applicant proposes to renovate the rear exterior of this existing single-family home while the current structure is in disrepair, and the applicant seeks to renovate the single-family home and reuse it for the same purpose. The structure's footprint and front face and elevations remain the same. The proposed renovations will include making the roofline consistent, so there's no longer a differentiation between the historic residence and the later additions. And the applicant will seek to make those window changes as we've proposed on the structure. Further, since it lays in the AE flood elevation, all mechanical systems are going to be moved from the basement to the attic space in conformance with the FEMA construction requirements, and the flood vents will be installed. For those reasons, we believe that the project is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure, and we would request the board approve same. And as I said earlier, the Historic Commission has already reviewed this project and released it from the demolition delay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. We will close that portion of the public hearing, the presentation portion, and go to the public comment section. Any member of the public who wishes to speak in support or opposition, just please raise your hand, give your name and your address, and kindly try to limit your comments to 2 minutes. Let's see, we have one hand, Chairman Glenn Richards of the Newburyport Historic Commission. Mr. Richards.
Thank you, Chair Champagne. Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street. Just a couple of very brief comments. One minor correction. The approval from of the plans by the Historical Commission was conditional on provision of additional details, which the applicant has provided. I think you saw some of those details on the plans that were shown tonight. So that condition was met. And should just point out to the, or let the board know that at the Historical Commission, a couple of members expressed the fact or their view that overall, they felt that the project would result in not a deterioration, but rather an improvement to the neighborhood because of the rather sorry condition of the property as it is, and the fact that despite that slight upward extension, they were making other changes that we viewed as improvements in terms of the materials and windows and so on. So it was generally looked upon favorably. That's it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Richards. Anyone else wishing to speak in connection with the application? Seeing no hands, going once, going twice. We will close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board. Let's see, we'll start with Mr. Moore.
I have no questions, Chairman. That was very thorough.
Thank you. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question, and it's really only for my own curiosity. Attorney Mead, could you explain what the flood vents are?
Mr. Delisle, no, I can't, except for that they are required in the AE zone. For this kind of construction, that's an architect's question. I'm not sure if it is a measure of reducing the pressure against a foundation should a flood occur or not. I will tell you the mechanicals, in order to meet the FEMA guidelines here, have to be moved to the attic. But I can't tell you the engineering or scientific reason why the flood vents are required.
This is Andy Port, the planning director. This issue comes up quite a bit on Plum Island, or a similar issue where there is, for the reason Attorney Mead stated, this is typically the reason why you want these flood vents, is to reduce the amount of force that is on the side of a house or a structure if it gets impacted by wave action or storm surge from, say, the flooding Merrimack River.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Attorney Mead. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I was honestly curious.
Yeah, no, Mr. Delisle, I didn't feel like you were putting me in the spot. I laughed because Mr. Richards asked me the same question at the historic meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
Mr. Delisle asked my question.
All right. So, Mr. Delisle, you owe Ms. Webb a question. As I okay, moving on then to Mr. Swanton.
No, I mean, I go past this quite a bit. I think it's a huge improvement. So I thought the presentation was quite thorough. I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. I too have no further questions. So we can conclude and close that portion of the public hearing and go to deliberations. Again, because we are deliberating a special permit for nonconformities, we would need to find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure. And of course, when making this finding, we as a board may consider factors such as size, scale, massing, volume, as compared to the other structures in the neighborhood. I also will note that based on our staff report, the application does trigger the tree and sidewalk ordinance, and the applicant has confirmed that the project, since it'll be substantially rehabilitated, they have reached out to DPS for tree and sidewalk recommendations. It looks like DPS has responded that there are no room for new street trees and the existing sidewalk is sufficient. So we can proceed with our deliberations around that, starting with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. I thought the presentation was very thorough. I agree with I think with everyone's opinion that a little TLC is exactly what the structure needs. It's well thought out, well presented, makes all the changes necessary that would need to be necessary, abutting the river as it does. It doesn't create any new nonconformities. Can't be a detriment to the neighborhood when it's improving the structure as much as it will. So I'm in full support for those reasons.
Okay, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with Mr. Moore. This looks like a well thought out project, and another project that that we see here at the ZBA, where you have a structure that may have seen better days, and it looks like it's going to see those better days in the future. Again, good for us as citizens of Newburyport. I can fully support this project.
Very good. Let's see, Ms. Webb.
I too can support this project. I think my colleagues have made very good points. I like that the Historic Commission has already passed their muster on this, and I also like that the applicant is showing the new addition with definitively separate materials to distinguish between the new addition and the existing. I neglected to ask during the question period the comment in our staff report about how this application may also require review by the Conservation Commission. I don't know if Andy Port might be able to comment on that at this point or not.
Mr. Ch
Yeah, this is just jurisdictional. I wouldn't expect any problems with the Conservation Commission if that's the question.
Well, the staff report says may also require review. Isn't that a yes or no question?
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please go ahead, Attorney Mead.
So the may require is depending on if there's any work to be done in the yard. So and depends on how close up. So we're filing an ANRAD to make that determination with the Conservation Commission, and because there's a patio out back, and so they have a review that they have to do relative to that. So we will be filing an ANRAD with the Conservation Commission.
Okay, thanks, Attorney Mead.
Sure.
Very good. Thank you, Attorney Mead, and thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Swanton.
Yes, I can support this for the reasons others and I have already said. I'd also like to add that it's very helpful to have the chair of the Historic Commission chiming in on these calls, and that adds to this project as well. So I can support this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton, and I concur. I would have nothing further to add. I think all of my colleagues have mentioned all of the high points that I felt as well. So with that, we'll conclude the deliberations portion of the public hearing. Do we have a motion to approve?
Mr. Moore here, I'll make a motion to approve special permit for nonconformities 2020-076 for 159 Water Street.
I'll second that, Mr. Delisle.
Very good. Motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Delisle. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application is approved. Congratulations and thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Chairman Richards, for the commentary from the Newburyport Historic Commission. Okay, moving to the next application, we have the application of 3 Hancock Street, the applicant James Bort Construction, in care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa. This is application 077 of 2020, a special permit for nonconformities to raise part of the roof of a pre-existing non-conforming structure by 20 inches. And I see that Attorney Mead is presenting. May we hear from the applicant, Attorney Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with me this evening is Scott Brown, the architect for the project as well. I'm here on behalf of James Bort Construction, who's the owner of the property. This property is noted as at 3 Hancock Street in Newburyport, and it's in the R2 zoning district. The property contains a 3-bedroom single-family home built in or around 1800, according to the Newburyport Historic data sheets. And so if you could move to the next slide, please, Andy. So the proposal is to raise the roof in the rear behind the ridge 20 inches. I'm going to let Scott go through the details about why that's necessary, but we shall say that it is a very small, petite house on Hancock Street, which we are trying to do as little as possible to make it livable. There is no change in the roof pitch. There are no other alterations of the dimensional nonconformities other than by this upward extension on the rear portion of the structure. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we have been in front of the Historic Commission because we are changing the roof line. They have not completed their review. We had a discussion relative to, and I'm glad Mr. Richards here because he can chime in on this later, relative to how that 20 inches should be attained in the rear. And there was a concern about the loss of and or movement of the chimney, which is now not going to happen. So we can talk about that in a little bit after Scott is done with that. We are back in front of the Historic Commission on Thursday. I would suggest, and we can talk in a minute about that, that regardless of the decision of the Historic Commission, the relief being sought from this board will not change because it's still the 20 inches upward extension on those sidelines. So this is 3 bedrooms. It's 1,354 square feet of living area. The ceiling heights are under 6 foot 6 inches and some lower in certain parts of the house. As I said, it's built in around 1800. It's in the R2 DCOD, but we don't trigger the DCOD. The property is pre-existing non-conforming for lot area, frontage, lot coverage, front yard setback, side yard setback. It's a petite house on a petite lot. The structure and property otherwise comply with the dimensional requirements. If you could go to the next slide, please, Andy. So here's the house. This is right off of Bromfield Street at the beginning of Hancock. So many of you may recognize it. It's on the left-hand side. And then you go to the next house, please. Next slide, please, Andy. And here is the side, both sides of the house. And the next slide, please, Andy. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to review the architectural plans and these existing conditions.
Great. Well, thank you, Lisa. Andy, could you please turn to the proposed elevations, page 10? Great. Well, thank you. So this is an old, quirky house with lots of issues. The biggest issue that we've encountered is lack of ceiling height. And as already mentioned, most of the house has ceiling heights of 6 foot 6 inches, with some significant areas on the second floor as low as 5 foot 11 inches. That is not habitable space by anyone's standards. This is not the first time that I've had a project with low unworkable ceilings, but this project is certainly the worst that I've had to deal with. In the past, with some of my past projects, I've been able to either drop the first floor level or go up, adding some roof dormers to the house in order to achieve, more height. With this project, neither of those scenarios are an option. We are already too low with the first floor, so lowering it is just not an option. We're already too low to the ground, so lowering it is not an option. And the shallow roof slopes on the back of the house, where we have most of our unworkable ceiling height issues, really make dormers prohibitive. So we've been very careful with our design to only get what we need without altering the character of the house. And as you can see from our proposed elevations here in the lower right-hand corner, we are proposing ceiling heights of only about 7 foot 6 inches. So these are workable ceiling heights, but certainly not gracious by any means. One of the things that we've been careful about is maintaining the proportional relationship of the lower roof slope in the back of the house. If you could zoom out for me, Andy. Looking at the lower left-hand elevation. So one of the things that we've been very careful, extraordinarily careful about trying to maintain is the relationship of this lower slope to the upper, steeper roof pitch. The left side of this house that we're seeing here is pretty prominent. When turning onto Hancock Street from Bromfield, it's one of the first things that you see. And when raising or altering this roof, I think it is very important that we maintain these existing relationships because they are integral to the character of the house. So on the side, if we could zoom back out again. So on the sides and rear of the house, we are proposing new window and door locations. But at the front of the house, we are not changing the location of the front door, nor are we changing any of the locations of the windows. And as already mentioned, the existing chimney, which is in great shape, will remain. The style of new front entry surround that we're proposing here and the 6/6 windows will be consistent with what would have been on this house when originally built. And you can also see from some of the material notes that we've included with this application, which do include a note about using cedar siding, that from these notes, you can see that we're proposing a high quality project. So I think in summary, I think what we're proposing here is restrained. I think it's reasonable. The roof height only changes 20 inches in this front elevation. And most importantly, what we are doing does not change the character of the house. And I certainly hope that the board agrees with me. And with that, I will hand it back to Attorney Mead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. So Andy, if you could go to the table, it's 2 slides up from this, I think. There we go. So as you can see, this is not a large lot, 2,167 square feet. It has inadequate frontage. It does, and the height, I think it's important to see the height. So the height is 18 because you measure it to the mean, right? And the proposed height is 18.75. This is not a tall structure. The lot coverage isn't changing. The open space isn't changing. None of the setbacks are changing. And of course, it meets the rear setback. So the exacerbation of those right and left side setbacks are what is being impacted by the increase in the ridge height. So Andy, if you could go to slide 11, please. So the board needs to make two determinations. One, will be there be any new nonconformities? And the answer is no. And then the second is whether or not the proposed changes are substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. So we believe that that won't be. We propose to raise the roof height by 20 inches as shown on the elevations that Scott has gone over. Other than the changes the windows, there's no other structural, we're not moving the envelope, if you will, of the project. And it's not going to affect the footprint of the structure or its relationship to the lot. You'll note that it could go back somewhat on this lot, but the applicant is not proposing to do that. He really is truly proposing to keep the character of the house intact. The project increases the height of the new home, but it's well under what the median roof height requirements are in the R2 district, and certainly well under what all of the surrounding properties are. Based upon the foregoing, we believe the project is not more detrimental, not substantially more detrimental or detrimental at all than the existing structure to the neighborhood due to the raising of the roof by 20 inches. I've also provided to the board 5 letters of support from the abutters relative to this project. And we hope that the board can consider granting this proposal because again, I believe notwithstanding the fact that the Historic Commission hasn't completed their review of it, the relief sought by this board, that is the increase in intensity of the sideline setback, will not change. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. Closing that portion of the presentation, we will go to public comment. And Andy, put up that slide again, if we could, for public comment. And I see we have one hand so far. Chairman Glenn Richards. We'll go ahead and recognize Mr. Richards. You have the floor.
Yes, Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street. Again, this is getting to be a thing. Anyway, just very briefly, Ms. Mead was correct that we are hearing this again this Thursday. I think there's a good chance that we'll be able to resolve the issue this week, but of course can't guarantee that. We'll have to see how the board feels about the changes that they have made. The way Ms. Mead characterized it is correct in that the chimney, was a concern, and so the fact that that's going to be not changing that's definitely a plus. But again, we'll have to see what the commission feels. One minor, well, maybe not minor. I'm pretty sure I heard Attorney Mead state at the beginning, one of the first slides, that the ridge height is not changing, but obviously you can see that the ridge height is changing. It's going to be what, 20 inches higher or whatever it is. So anyway, just wanted to make sure that that was quite clear. And I think that's about it. I guess it'll be up to you whether to continue to until you see how this pans out at the NHC, or if you want to or do something else. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Richards. Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing no hands, going once, twice. We will close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board. And we'll begin with Mr. Moore.
Once again, thorough presentation. I don't have any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had just a couple questions. I guess these would be probably for Mr. Brown. What are the materials that you're using on the that door, the door frame? I guess it would be, which it looks like you've improved the door frame, door surround for the front door. I was curious as to what those materials.
Yeah, exactly. What we're trying to do here is to put something on the house again, you know, which would what would have been there when the house was built originally. And with this, we're proposing a wood door. The trim surrounding it will be made of rot-resistant composite materials that will be painted, and we're using those products in and around a lot. Most people are using those products in and around the city, and when they're painted, at the end of the day, they do appear to be sort of authentic products, and they hold paint well, and they do last forever. And both of those things are both good things.
That is true. All right, thank you very much.
All right, very good. Ms. Webb.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I think it's a good presentation. I guess my only question, I mean, I like it as is. My only question is, the Historical Commission kind of said, well, you could wait for our report, but is their report, does it directly bear on what we're deciding here, or is it other factors that they are considering in their own domain?
So thank you, Mr. Swanton. I think that's a good question. They are deciding on the ridge change. I mean, the change of the roof height, right? And when we originally proposed this to them 3 or 4 weeks ago, I don't recall how many now. We were actually moving the chimney. And actually there was a proposal, it was a proposal to move the chimney. And that gave them a lot of consternation. And so Mr. Brown went through a couple iterations on how to get the height that he needed, one of which was what we have proposed. So but the relief is the same. It's a 20-inch ridge height, raising. So the impact on your decision is whether or not that 20-inch increase is acceptable and substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or not. And so I don't think it matters what the Historic Commission says, like if they approve an iteration of this. We're hopeful, of course, that they approve this. I think this meets all the things that they said, but the impact is the 20-inch impact or extension of those sideline setbacks.
I see. Well, thank you for your answer. Appreciate it.
Okay, I too have no further questions that haven't been already addressed. I feel it was complete and very detailed presentation. So we'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to deliberations. And again, this is a special permit for nonconformity. So in deliberating, we must, as a board, determine whether or not the applicant has met their burden, and we must, in finding that they have, we must find that there will be no addition of a new nonconformity, and that there will be no new nonconformity. The board must also find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing nonconforming use or structure. And of course, the board, in finding that, must consider factors such as size, scale, massing, and volume as compared to other structures in the neighborhood. It also, and I'll note, the application does not appear to trigger the street, tree, and sidewalk ordinance. So let us as a board deliberate with those criteria in mind. Moving to deliberations, then Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a thoughtful treatment of this historic building. I don't find the 20-inch roof line to be offensive or in any way more detrimental to the neighborhood on its face. I appreciate Mr. Richards' what I would consider cautiously optimistic comments on the changes, and I would agree that if as a board we are just looking at the fact there's no new nonconformities and we're merely giving the special permission basically for 20 inches up, with the sensitivity that the architect and the owner has made to keeping with the roof lines, at the request and in concert with the Historic Commission. I can certainly support moving this forward ahead of the meeting Thursday with the NHC, given that it'll be subject to the demo delay being lifted anyway, and anything above the 20 inches presented, I'm sure will have to come back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Yeah, I would concur with Mr. Moore. Again, I would also like to mention Mr. Richards' work tonight in coming and speaking about this application, as well as the many others that he's addressed also. It's good to get sort of the preview as to what the Historical Commission will be most likely doing. So I think we can, I can support this being moved along subject to the Historical Commission's approval.
All right, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Ms. Webb?
I agree with both Mr. Delisle and Mr. Moore. I can support this application, conditioned on the NHC's decision later this week.
All right, thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Swanton.
Yes, and I too can support it. I think they all said it really well. I mean, from my point of view, it's not substantially more detrimental. It's an improvement. So I can enthusiastically support this.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. And Rob Ciampetti, I concur with my colleagues, and I too can support it. Having concluded deliberations, we will close that portion of the public hearing. Members of the ZBA, may I have a motion? And if you're crafting a motion and you wish to condition it with anything regarding the Newburyport Historic Commission, just please make that note in your motion.
Mr. Delisle, I'll make the motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 3 Hancock Street, file number 2020-077, subject to the subject to approval from the Historical Commission to move forward.
Second, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton, motion is made by Mr. Delisle, seconded by Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Ms. Webb.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Rob Ciampetti. I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the application is approved. Congratulations and thank you to everyone for your participation, applicants, Attorney Mead, and Chairman. Moving now to the final matter that we had originally by motion moved to the end of our agenda. This is the matter of Ryan McShera, Red Barn Architecture, 468th Street. In that I must continue to recuse myself from this application. I will be stepping down, turning over the gavel to our Vice Chair, Mr. Moore, who will take over from here. And in that it's the last application of the evening, I'll also be logging off. So thank you all and good luck and enjoy the rest of the evening. With that, Mr. Moore, you have the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Our last item tonight is, as the chairman said, 468th Street. And as some may recall, this application was reopened by the board after an open discussion of new analysis was provided by board member Ken Swanton at our 10/13 meeting. Some will also recall that this application began in May and was continued multiple times over the course of the summer. It is a request to demolish an existing non-conforming structure and construct a new 2-story structure with an additional 639 square feet and parking below. During earlier presentations where several board members expressed great concern with respect to FAR data, and after several continuances to allow the applicant to refine their data, the applicant returned on September 8th to provide updated information with respect to the floor area ratio, or FAR, of the proposed structure and the surrounding neighborhood. After the presentation of the revised FAR data on the 8th, an abutter continued to question the accuracy of the ratios presented by the applicant, given that the abutter did not agree with the value assigned to their own home. Despite the abutter's concern, the board considered all of the information provided on the 8th and voted to approve the application. I will note that during that time, Mr. Swanton requested a clear table of values to view during the questions and discussions during that meeting on the 8th. Subsequent to the September 8th meeting and before the decision was issued or filed with the city clerk, Mr. Swanton began reevaluating the data and presented his findings to the board during that 10/13 Zoom meeting, as he had renewed concerns over the information the board had used in the decision-making process in approving the application. Tonight, we find ourselves with a reopened application and additional information in the form of a memo from our zoning administrator. The memo provides the calculus she uses in determining the FAR as guided by the Newburyport zoning ordinance with respect to the PIOD, or the Plum Island Overlay District. This memo has also guided the applicant in a resubmission of FAR data to support their application. It is with that backdrop that I ask again to hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Mead Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street, on behalf of Holly and Jeff McDonald, who own 468th Street. And with me this evening is the architect, Ryan McShay, to present this application again to the board. I'm going to do an overview of the application in addition to a little bit deeper dive on the FAR. The board has received our filing again, in addition to a letter from Mr. McShay regarding his earlier calculations. So if you could go to the first slide, please. So this is an application for a special permit to modify a pre-existing non-conforming structure and a special permit for an increase in FAR over the 0.25 required under the ordinance. As the chair noted, we received a special permit on the September 8th meeting, and since that time, a member of the board and other members have discussed a concern about a discrepancy in the FAR numbers presented. The architect noted in his letter to the board, he took the total gross square footage from the assessor's records for the surrounding properties without account for the deductions for those portions of those numbers which may not have been included in the FAR definition for his comparison, thus not providing the board with an apple-to-apple comparison as previously requested. To the extent reasonably possible and with best efforts, the FAR numbers for the comparison purposes for the surrounding homes have been redone, and to the extent they have possibly been verified from a view from the street. These numbers were also compiled having received the zoning code enforcement officer's interpretation of FAR for the island, which she recently issued. So again, this is a project in the PIOD. The property is pre-existing non-conforming for lot area, frontage, front yard setback, and the side B setback. The structure and property otherwise conform to the PIOD requirements. If you go to the next slide, please. So as you can see, we're actually improving some of the dimensional requirements in the proposed conditions. The property is 4,642 square feet, where 12,000 are required, has 55 feet of frontage, where 120 is required. The height is currently 14 feet. It's 1.5 stories, but the second story, there's like 70 square feet of living area. So it's an A-frame, if that's, many of you I'm sure have been out to see it now. The proposed structure is going to be 32 feet mean height, which complies with the ordinance. The lot coverage is currently 11%, and it goes to 16, which is still well below the 20% requirement. And the open space is currently at 89, and it's reduced to 84%. So there's a slight reduction in the open space requirement. The front setback is currently at 19.5. That improves to 23.1. Side setback A is at 22, and it continues to meet it at 20.1. Side setback B is currently at 2.3 and is improved to 10.4. So that meets the minimum requirement for side setback for new structures in the ordinance. And the rear setback is 42.9, and it's actually increased to 43.2 given the shape of the structure. The FAR is currently at 21, and the proposal is to have it to go to 0.32. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here's a photograph of the structure. As you can see, it's built in, it literally built into the dune, and you can see the rear reduction there. And it's an A-frame, so you can also see how there's only a small amount of living space on the second floor. If you can go to the next slide, please, Andy. And here's a view from the intersection of 65th and Northern, looking down the street, and then a little bit further away, and then looking directly down the street from Northern down to 65th. You go to the next slide, please, Andy. And these are the elevations of the existing conditions. So we have the east elevation. You go to the next slide, please, Andy. And the south elevation. Next slide, please. And existing west elevation. And the existing north elevation. And then if you go to the next slide. So this is also the site plan. I think what's important to see about the site plan is you can see how it improves the setbacks on that side B and is located more towards the middle of the lot rather than towards the edge on that side B. So as you are aware, if you go to the next slide, please, Andy. The project is to demolish the single family home, elevate it above the floodplain, increase the FAR from 21 to 32, eliminate the front yard setback nonconformity, reduce the side B setback nonconformity, maintain over 80% open space, and maintain the requirements with the other dimensional requirements. The Conservation Commission has issued an order of condition for this project, finding the project met the performance standards for the Plum Island resource areas and could go forward. As you know, we were not involved in the beginning of this project. And so in order to understand more fully what the board was requesting when they were requesting a comparison of the FAR, which by the way is entirely appropriate, we reviewed the minutes of the board meetings from July 14th and August 11th. If you can go to the next slide, please, Andy. And so before I go into that, here's the proposed structure. We have the proposed first floor, or I guess the ground level. And the next slide, please. So here's the first floor. That's the elevated first level. And the next slide, please. And then the next slide, this continues to be a 3-bedroom home, which it is today. And the next slide, please, Andy. And then you see how this is elevated. Again, to address Mr. Delisle, you had an earlier question on earlier application relative to the raising of that first floor member, what they call the first floor living area member, which has to be raised above the floodplain or flood elevation. And that's why this house is being raised. It meets the performance standard and is certainly better for flood resiliency and is required when you do substantial renovation, which is a renovation that's equal to 50% or more the value of the structure itself. And then the next slide, please, Andy. So here's the other elevation at left side, and the next slide, Andy. And here we have the rear elevation. And the next slide, please, Andy. And the right side elevation. And go to the next slide, please. So the ordinance requires a comparison to the neighborhood. And I know that there's some discussion in the staff notes relative to whether or not the board should compare the FARs. And so it's difficult to compare FARs for sure, for all of the reasons we've now experienced. But the board certainly has to compare the structure to the neighborhood because that's the standard, right? Whether or not this is going to be substantially more detrimental to the existing non-conforming structure or use to the neighborhood or the PIOD. You can't do that in a vacuum for sure. So if you go to the next slide, Andy. So the purpose of the PIOD, as we look at this, is to reduce damage to the public and private property resulting in floodwaters, ensure public safety by reducing threats to life and personal property, eliminate costs associated with responsive cleanup and flooding, avoid the loss of utility services damaged by flooding. That's why we lift the utilities. Prevent occurrence of public emergencies resulting from water quality contamination or pollution due to flooding, and eliminating new hazards to emergency response officials. You go to the next slide, please. In this particular instance, we are keeping this a single family home, and we're constructing a new single family home with the same number of bedrooms elevated on pilings. We are elevating the home above the floodplain. If you could go to the next slide, please, Andy. So the standard in the ordinance is the alteration and reconstruction or extension or change to the floor area ratio may be allowed upon the grant of a special permit by the Board of Appeals and shall not require a variance. I think that's very important to remember. And I talked about this the last time we were before the board. In the rest of the city, if you're going to exceed if you don't currently meet and are going to exceed, if you currently meet and are then going to exceed a dimensional requirement, it requires you to get a variance. But on Plum Island, if you currently meet a particular dimensional requirement, in this instance, the floor area ratio, you're not required to get a variance. It's a lesser standard. It's a special permit standard. So the standard is whether or not it's substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood and to the PIOD. I think it's a significant difference. And I believe that the reason is that the island, the lots are so small, and because most of the homes don't meet the flood requirements and the flood resiliency requirements, there's some latitude that's given to this board to approve improvements that may exceed the FAR, but may be better for the island and or for the neighborhood. And then in addition, the standard is also whether or not the modifications are substantially more detrimental to the existing structure or to the neighborhood or the PIOD, from the existing structure or to the neighborhood to the PIOD. So if you go to the next slide, please, Andy. So this board wanted to know, as it was beginning its deliberations in July and August, how is it that this compares? We can see how it compares, but how does it really compare from a volume point of view? Really, because that's what we're looking at when we look at FAR, is volume under the roof. And on July 14th, the minutes reflect that Mr. Delisle would also like to receive data on other structures in the neighborhood. Perfectly reasonable. August 11th, Ms. Webb said she would like more information on the abutting properties, while the applicant has demonstrated that there are parcels with greater densities. They are not immediately adjacent to the property in question. Mr. Delisle said while the proposed structures would be an improvement over the existing one, he would like the additional information on the FAR of the immediately abutting properties. All of those reasonable questions. I didn't represent the applicants at the August 11th meeting, but I heard that presentation. And there was a presentation by the architect and his team relative to properties around there, but certainly not the ones that were immediately adjacent. So the architect went to work. So Andy, if you go to the next slide, please. So as you're aware, at that August meeting, when the architect made his presentation, what was discovered was that actually he was using the living area when comparing it to this property as opposed to the FAR. So when we were engaged, we had that conversation, and Mr. McShray came up with this plan, which you saw at the September 8th meeting. He used at that time, as he exclaimed several times in the meeting, the gross floor area as shown on the assessor's cards without consideration. Well, he exclaimed that at the meeting, that he used the gross floor area. But what we didn't know at the time was that it was without consideration of the appropriate deductions to meet the FAR definition in the PIOD. But what's important here is this is what the board based its decision on. So let's look at it. 4 of these properties have FAR less than or equal to 25%. So those are the yellow ones. 6 have an FAR between 0.26 and 0.32. Those are the blue ones. And 13 in this have an FAR in excess of 3.2. Those are the red ones. So there were 19 properties that exceeded the 0.25 FAR. And then the board closed its hearing and based its decision, hopefully, on more than just these calculations, because certainly there are more considerations to be taken other than FAR, not the least of which is flood resiliency construction. On October 22nd, the board voted to reopen this public hearing. On October 27th, the Newburyport zoning administrator issued a memorandum on the Plum Island floor area ratio calculations to be very clear with everyone exactly what she considers to be the meaning of the definition of FAR. Andy, if you could go to the next slide, please. This slide now represents the FAR calculations pursuant to the zoning administrator's memorandum and a number of other things, because let's be clear, we cannot go into every single property that's not the property of the applicant. These represent the most accurate calculations possible on the immediately adjacent properties, taking into account it's not possible to enter those properties. And the result, so the result shows a different distribution, but remains relatively consistent despite the second calculation, albeit not heavily as weighted to the over the 0.32s. Here, Mr. McShray used the applicable ordinance definitions and the October 27th memorandum of the zoning administrator interpreting FAR. He used data from the assessor's cards and data from field visits undertaken by myself personally, along with my colleague, Libby Bowker, to verify to the extent that we could what was on the ground, so to speak. And that is what we base this presentation on. We note it is not a perfect calculation. The zoning administrator's interpretation prevents it. It's not her fault, but it's impossible unless you actually go in and take measurements inside each of these houses to have a perfect exact calculation. That being said, this board did not request a perfect calculation, nor does the ordinance require that when making comparisons. The board wanted more information on the surrounding properties. The key word of the standard at play here is substantially. Substantially does not require exactness. It requires information sufficient to determine whether the proposed alteration is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIA. That is, to a great or significant extent more detrimental. The data provided is as accurate as it can possibly be. It applies the most recent official guidance on the FAR calculations. It uses conservative measures when using assessor card data for certain spaces. For example, in the finished half story, the living area from the assessor's card was used as opposed to the gross floor area, because living area includes a head height of 6 feet, which is what the zoning code administrator's office uses. An exterior visual inspection on all properties was done to discern whether the basements on the assessor's cards were actually crawl spaces or whether attics had the requisite head height to the extent that could be determined from a visual inspection or reasonable interpretation from the street. So for example, when we went by and we saw that there was a bulkhead going into a basement, we thought that that was not a usable area, as opposed to a slider that walked into a basement, which clearly had head height of 6 feet. The visual inspection also allowed us to include sheds, largely not listed on the assessor's card in the FAR calculation as prescribed by the zoning code enforcement officer's memorandum. This data is supported by the assessor's cards, which we provided to you, and noting the source of numbers used, the verifiable calculations, in response to the board's request for more information. So what do we have? The second iteration of calculations did not materially change the outcome. The above data shows that the distribution of FAR densities for the properties remains split, with a higher number above 0.25. So this time, we had 9 properties with a FAR equal to or less than 0.25. Those are the yellow ones on here. We had 6 with an FAR between 0.26 and 0.32. Those are the blue ones. And there were 8 that had an FAR exceeding 0.32. Those are the red ones. So with 14 properties, more than half of the properties exceeded an FAR of 0.25. So most of the properties still exceed the 0.25 FAR in the neighborhood. This is but one aspect of how the board determined the outcome previously. Nothing has changed about the specific criteria in the ordinance. Andy, if you go to the next slide. Now, this you can hardly read, but it is a compilation of what you have in your packages. And it is the compilation. If we need to, we can go through this individually, but it's what's shown on the plans as well. So Andy, if you could go to the next slide. So as I just said, I can reiterate, 8 have FARs that exceed 0.32, 6 have FARs between 0.25 and 0.32. A total of 14 have, of the 23, have FARs that exceed the PIOD standard. And Andy, if you go to the next slide. So the proposed project is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure or use. It's still a single-family use that's maintained. FAR is consistent with the surrounding homes. It eliminates the setback nonconformity and reduces the side B, the front setback nonconformity, and reduces the side B nonconformity. It maintains double the required open space. It elevates the home to a preferred standard for a flood zone where flood resiliency is the main purpose of the PIOD. The home is more conforming from a dimensional point of view once it will be renovated as proposed. It's better for the environment and clearly and more in line with the purpose of the PIOD once renovated. The Conservation Commission has approved the changes in conformance with the performance standards. I remind the board again, this is a special permit standard, not a variance. The City Council contemplated in the adoption of the PIOD that there would be instances where homeowners would need or want to exceed the FAR should they and should be permitted to do so upon the proper showing that would not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the PIOD. Despite the ongoing efforts and pleas of the planning staff that this board does not make policy, the City Council makes policy. The board needs to apply the ordinance with the facts at hand. It's not appropriate to speculate about future unknown circumstances relative to growth and development in the PIOD. In the case of Fitzsimmons versus the Board of Appeals of Chatham, the plaintiff sought a special permit to construct an addition to convert a summer cottage into more of a house. The appeals court said that the zoning board denied based on detriment to the neighborhood, as it would be difficult in the future to refuse the plaintiff's permission for year-round occupancy. Those were the facts. However, the appeals court disagreed and stated, "We think the board erred when it took into account as bearing upon present decision a putative problem to be faced in the indefinite future upon now uncertain facts." The board has to deal with what's in front of them and has to apply the ordinance as the City Council has adopted it to date, not what the planning office wishes it would be. The board approved these improvements before. While some of the information has changed, it has not changed dramatically, and no other factors upon which your decision was based is different. Mr. McSherritt pointed out that he should have been clear about what the basis was for the FAR calculation, or the comparison, I should say, for the gross square footage versus the surrounding homes. For that, we have now presented the information to the best of our ability to answer any questions about inconsistencies which may have been presented. We request the board affirm your prior decision, as you can still find that the proposed structure is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD than the existing structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. At this point, we're going to elicit any opinions of any of the public that's listening to that or just heard that presentation. So let's see, we still have a good list of participants. Again, we're not looking for those that are in favor or any order. Just anyone that wishes to speak, please raise your hand. You will be recognized and asked to contribute. I see Tara Kamet or Kamet.
Yeah, this is Ron Boisvert at 1068th Street. I just want to address a couple things. I'm going to try to be as quick as I can. To elaborate on Attorney Mead's statement of purpose under Section 21A, there's one piece I didn't see that was listed on there, which was to limit the expansion of non-conforming single and two-family structures so as to prevent the exacerbation of existing problems with density and intensity of use. So, I think that should be factored in there as well. Regarding the 14 properties that exceed the 0.25 FAR, of those, at most, there are 3 that were done after the establishment of the PIOD. So we're looking at properties that were constructed anywhere from 1900 to 1980, and where the purpose of this is to prevent that expansion of non-conforming structures, kind of makes me question why we have it if we can look at structures that were built 100 years ago and use that as a justification to disregard the standard. As far as being not more detrimental, if I did my math correctly, the 0.32 FAR is 28% over the ordinance, and it's a 66% increase in the existing FAR. I also fail to see how the rear setback improved, unless I misread that on the drawing real quick. I believe it said it improved to something like 43 feet. And if I saw it on the drawing, it's actually 30 point something. So I think that's also of note. Let's see. And I think that's pretty much all I have right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in attendance that wishes to comment?
Mr. Moore, if I could make a correction on something I said before we
Sure.
go to, I said that it currently has 3 and it's going to have 3. It has 2 bedrooms currently. It's going to have 3 bedrooms as permitted under the PIOD. I apologize for that incorrect statement.
Thank you for the correction. So I see no further hands raised from the public who wishes to comment. So, seeing none, I will close that portion of the meeting. Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just had a quick question for Mr. McShara. Is there an attic for 468th Street? I couldn't tell. It looks like it from the drawing to me, but I'm not positive on that.
There is, sorry, Ryan McShara, 84 High Street, Ipswich, Red Barn Architecture. While there is space above the, sorry, are you guys getting the feedback?
Yeah.
A little bit. Trying to turn it down a little bit. There is space above the ceiling joist on the second floor, but won't be greater in 6 feet of height.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now we will close off the public comment section, and we'll turn to questions from the board. And given all the work that was done on this, I'm going to go from a little different standing in the order that we asked for questions, and I'm going to go out of order, and we'll go with Mr. Swanton first, since he put all the work in on this, and see if he has any. He probably should review what he mentioned in his meeting with us, his special meeting with us, and then I'll let him run with the first questions.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, could you put up slide 13, please?
Sure. Of the applicants, you mean?
Yes.
Sure. Sorry, what number was that again?
13.
13, okay.
Yes, thank you. At our last hearing, when we reviewed this back in September, we were showed a comparison chart on the FARs that compared this house in the drawing here, which had the 0.32 FARs, we've heard again tonight, to the FAR of its neighbors. And we just saw that comparison chart again. And it was very compelling that night. Most of us stated that was a key reason for us approving it, and we unanimously approved it. I think it's important to stress that the only reason we are back here tonight is that we found out later that that pivotal comparison turned out to be apples and oranges. And for example, this slide clearly shows that the proposed house has a good sized deck, which was of course not included in the 0.32 FAR, but somehow decks were included in all of the neighborhood FARs that we saw that night. So before we get into the new information that we're looking at tonight, I just want to ask a simple question and give the applicant a chance to talk about what happened here. You know, why did you show us a FAR comparison that included decks on all the neighbors' houses except this one?
Ryan McSherry here, 84 High Street, Ipswich, Red Barn Architecture. Mr. Swanton, I think your critique is accurate and carries a lot of truth. And I want to sincerely apologize to the board for whatever misunderstanding or inconsistencies I may have previously presented. It certainly wasn't our intent to doctor the information or make a presentation to you to get you on our side that carried incorrect information, but some of the inconsistencies that you pointed out are true. We went through the assessor's information and used the gross floor area as a tabulation from the bottom of their card and applied it to the area of the lot and didn't carefully review for deductions for decks and things of those nature. So I think your critique there is absolutely true and correct. And I do sincerely apologize to the board for presenting the data in a different way last time. That certainly would appear to present apples to oranges.
I appreciate your comments on that. I really do. I'm not going to belabor this meeting. It's getting late, but we talked in our last meeting that if you look at the minutes, four of the five people who voted mentioned that data was critical and very important. And we were delighted to see it that night, actually. So it was sad to find that it was apples and oranges, but I appreciate your sincere comments there about how it came about. I guess my second question is, we've learned a lot about FAR data as a result of this project. One of the biggest things we've learned is that you really can't calculate FARs for neighbors from assessor data because it doesn't tell you where the headroom is. You have to know if there's 6 feet of headroom. I think, Attorney Mead, you just chatted about that, about how, you can't, unless you go in the houses, you really can't tell. Quite frankly, based on what we've learned, I'm sorry that we ever encouraged you to try to calculate this FAR data for the neighbors. But I guess my problem tonight is here we are again. You are again showing us yet another set of neighborhood FAR data for which you don't know the headroom, so you've had to guess. I appreciate you went down there and you try to look and see, well, what basements do you think we can get in and what, and the planning department has already warned us and said it can't verify any of this data. The presentation we just saw was 28 pages long. The neighborhood FAR data on it, the new stuff, was only 4 pages of it. I guess my question is, rather than spend any more time trying to make sense of questionable neighborhood FAR data that can't be verified, that's based on a lot of guesses, wouldn't it be better to take a step back here and decide whether this project should go ahead based on the information in your other 24 pages of your presentation and not kind of pollute it with trying to grapple with this? I know we asked for it, but now that we know what it was and how you had to calculate it and how you couldn't get it easily, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to focus on it. So why are we belaboring it? Why not just focus on the pros and cons of the rest of the application? That's my question.
Mr. Swanton, I couldn't agree with you more, except for that, there are two things. One, the board asked for it. So to the extent it could be provided, we attempted to do that. I think that it was important also to go through the exercise to the extent that it could be, and it's not completely accurate for all of the reasons you said and I said, that it's not that far off, that these houses are about, you know, this is not a huge house. It's going to be 1,400 square feet. Let me just see. Yeah, 1,494 square feet. It's not a giant house, and there are houses right around it that are much larger than this house. Importantly, to your point, it is going to be flood resilient. It's improving the nonconformities to Mr. I don't think his name, Mr. Boysevert's earlier comment relative to that last condition or last kind of purpose in the PIOD, that it is more conforming and not non-conforming than the existing structure. We're not adding a new residence, which is really what that provision talks about, is they don't want to add new single and two family residences. They want to improve, if they're going to do anything, the residences that are there, to have them be more flood resilient, because as you know, under 40A Section 6 and under the zoning ordinance, individuals who own single and two family homes are allowed to improve their property, even if they're non-conforming. They're not prevented from doing that, and they need a special permit, obviously, in some instances to do that. So the idea is to have somebody improve their property if they have a single or two family home within certain confines, for sure. In this instance, this new house actually does that. It's a much better situation than the current structure, which is actually built into a dune. And this takes it up out of the dune and makes it more flood resilient. So, I would love to just not consider the FAR, because it's not possible to get it accurate for other houses.
I think you answered my question. I mean, that basically was my question. Why are we belaboring something that we was extremely difficult to really judge, and you can't verify it. So I'm glad to hear you agree that we should really be looking at the rest of this stuff.
Yeah,
and I do appreciate the earlier comment that, that apples and oranges thing that we based our decision on was unfortunate. And I do appreciate the sincere apology from the people who did it. I guess my next question would be, I mean, we made a decision based on data that we now all agree was wrong and unfortunate. In my opinion, that's a bit of a tainted decision. And, I doesn't seem right to me to move forward with this project based on a tainted decision. So to me, I guess my question is, I don't know if this is a question for the legal team here, but to avoid that, if we rescind the previous decision and then have a new discussion and a new vote on, without that as being the pivotal factor, not looking at that neighborhood FAR data that we now realize was probably not the right thing to do. Is that the right way to unravel this? So we're not having a decision based on tainted data.
Andy, you can address this.
Sorry, a question for our legal counsel, not for the applicant, I think.
Is counsel here?
Yeah, so Attorney Eichmann, are you there?
Oh, great.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Jonathan.
Looks like I'm still muted.
So
we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. John Eichmann from the City Solicitor's Office. I think we discussed this just briefly at the last public hearing on this application, where the public hearing was closed and then a vote was taken to reopen public hearing. But it was at that point determined that at this public hearing, if the board decided that they wanted to revisit the vote they had taken, that a motion to reconsider would be the appropriate motion to make. If that motion was successful, then another vote could be taken on the application.
And I guess my question, I appreciate that is the two-step process, but since our vote on back in September was based on data that we're now, people are apologizing for, if we rescind that vote, And then if we took a new vote that without considering the neighborhood FAR data, I don't know if it would pass or not, but if it passed, would it therefore no longer, would it be a stronger decision because it wasn't based on data that we all now realize, you know, was apples and oranges? That's my legal question.
Yeah, to the board, to that question, your decision, if you vote to reconsider this and then take another vote on the application, your decision is going to be based on the evidence before you. It won't be tainted, in my opinion, based on your prior vote. It will be based on what you have now before you and what you decide would be a basis for your decision. So I don't believe that your prior decision would be an impediment to you taking a new vote.
Okay, thank you. Really, at this time, even though I put a lot of work into this previously, those are my two big, my big questions have been asked. I may have others, but I'll pass the microphone to someone else.
All right, thank you, Attorney Eichmann, and thank you, Mr. Swanton. I'll just continue and I'll just go to the list as we normally do. So I'll go with Mr. Delisle. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I guess, I don't want to beat up on Mr. McSheriff, and I don't really want to go back into the FAR question, but I will. So with regard to the first FAR study that was presented to us on August 11th, Mr. McSheriff, there was a different methodology for calculating the FAR at that point in time, correct?
Correct.
And then as between the August 11th and the September 8th studies, how did you determine how to revisit or revise the methodology?
We went from using the living area in the assessor's data to the gross floor area.
Okay, but yeah, that I understand that, but how did that occur to you to do that, or why did that occur to you?
We reviewed the definitions in the PIOD, and we're attempting to get more accurate data for the board.
Okay.
Thank you. Good? You good? Okay, thank you. Do you have an additional question, Mr. Delisle?
Yes, just a second. I was thanking Mr. McSheriff for his response. Yeah, I guess I don't really have any further questions on this. I guess my comment at this point, which is not part of my deliberation, but just my comment at the question phase, is that we spent so much time on the FAR and so much energy on FAR that I'm not sure that we have, I don't even know if I want to say this. I'm not sure that we have sufficient evidence before us to make a determination as to whether the structure is substantially more detrimental than the existing structure to the neighborhood, because we focus so much on the PIOD, because if I remember correctly, we focus so much on the FAR, and if I remember correctly, the whole FAR, the question and request for the FAR study came up because that was really what I think that the board at the time was looking for a way to see things the applicant's way. And I think that the FAR study was what the board thought would be helpful to the applicant. And it certainly ended up being quite an odyssey. But I think that we focused so much on that I'm not sure that we have sufficient evidence otherwise.
Well, thank you, Mr. Delisle. I think, again, we'll flesh that up in deliberations a little bit, I'm sure. But I certainly understand your point.
Mr. Moore, can I address that for a second?
Sure.
So, Mr. Delisle, I certainly appreciate that, because clearly there was a rabbit hole that everybody went down. But before doing that, you made a comment, well, at least it was in the minutes, that if you could go back, Andy, to the slide that has the comments from the minutes, maybe 23, right before this. Yeah. So you say at that time in August, and again, this is before my participation, so we went to the minutes, Mr. Delisle said that while the proposed structures would be an improvement over the existing ones, he wanted information more about the immediately abutting properties. So what you're saying now is, well, you think that obviously an improvement for the property itself, your question is what, how do they go, how does it work within the neighborhood? So let's back up, Andy, to the photographs that are at the beginning of this presentation, just to, maybe this is helpful. So obviously here is the existing structure. And then if you go to the next photographs, it's a little bit, you can see a little bit, so you can see that in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the structure at issue. And that house right behind it, I believe, is Mr. Boycevert's house and Ms. Camett's house right there. You can see the house beyond theirs is improved. I was just out there, now I can't remember what's right across the street, but you can see the house behind it is also improved, probably up on pilings. You see the deck behind the A-frame to the right of it. Andy, if you could go to the other slides here, let's see what else we can see. If you go to the next, on the right-hand side, just blow up where the red circle is. So this is Northern Boulevard. So you can see the house right there, and then you can see the two houses in front of it, both on the left and the right, for the neighborhood. You can get a little better picture of the pink house-ish salmon color house to the rear, which is also obviously looks like it's a two-story house. And then, Andy, if you go to the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. So this is looking directly down the street. So the houses on the left behind that pine tree, that evergreen, it's kind of a conglomeration of houses. There's a two-family there, which has got that little one-story on, and then there's a two-story beyond that. You can see beyond, I believe that's the taller one there, I believe is Mr. Boycevert's house. So it's directly behind the A-frame. That's the tallest one actually in this photograph, which I think was probably constructed around 2007, 2008. So I think that you can see the neighborhood. Some of the houses have been reconstructed in accordance with the flood resiliency standards, others haven't. Certainly constructing this house to be out of the dune and more flood resilient is better for the neighborhood, because it's better for implications of flooding that happen out there. It's better for sand movement. Obviously, that's why the Conservation Commission approved it. It's clearly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure, which is really the standard. To a greater extent, is it substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood? And given that it would meet all of the flood construction requirements, it would be more in conformance with the existing, with the required setbacks, although not entirely conforming, but more conforming. I think that the board would have that information. That would be my position, but we're happy to answer more questions.
Thank you, Attorney Mead.
Attorney Mead, so thank you for that. That is actually very helpful. That reminds me of the the other evidence that we have when we go and look at things, or we can look at things on Google Maps or
Right.
what have you. That again, coming up out of this rabbit hole is proving to be a little bit difficult.
You're welcome.
Anything further, Mr. Delisle?
No, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Ms. Webb, do you have any questions?
Were we in the questions or deliberations section? I'm sorry, it's kind of
We're
late.
kind of in questions. Yeah, we're in questions, but they've kind of bled into a deliberation a little bit. But if you want to wait, we'll get into deliberations shortly. Whatever you want to do.
I have no questions. I'll hold my comments for deliberations.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Chagnon?
Mr. Moore, I think Mr. Ciampetti indicated that Mr. Banovic was on for this one.
That's right. You're correct. I apologize. Thanks for correcting me there, Mr. Banovic.
I guess I don't necessarily have a specific question. I guess being a new member to the board, I guess for areas of Plum Island, I guess we're supposed to set our direction from the Plum Island Overlay District. And we've been talking a lot about the floor area ratio. I guess what's concerning to me is that this is a 20% increase above the FAR, and sounds pretty substantial to me. And I do see abutters that are concerned with this as well. I think it is, the ratio itself is a measure of the amount of floor area to the amount of lot size. And so I do see that as still a valid measurement tool. And maybe it needs more refinement, but it is a tool for us, and it is in the PIOD as a way to assess these things. So I guess not necessarily a question, but something for the TF deliberation. So that's my comments.
Mr. Chair, if I could, as a matter of point of order, and perhaps your counsel can answer this question. I don't know that Mr. Banovic participated in all of the earlier hearings, nor do I know that he was a member of the board at the earlier hearings. If this board is asking to reconsider a vote concerning a hearing for which he neither participated nor was a member, that may be a problem for you all, and Mr. Channon may want to step back in, but that is an issue between the board and your counsel.
Excellent point, Attorney Mead. I would like to go to Attorney Eichmann for an opinion on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a good point made by Attorney Mead. I'm not aware of the record, the public hearing record on this, but it would be correct that to vote on this application, even on a reconsideration, the members would have to be present for all sessions of the public hearing, and certainly be a member of the board when the hearing was opened. So it would be worthwhile to look at the record to make that determination.
The information that Attorney Mead mentioned appears correct, and I do agree with Attorney Eichmann that it would be appropriate to have the correct members involved.
Thank you, Andy. So on that, then Mr. Chagnon is tagged back in.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
I don't have any questions. I just maybe to help Mr. Delisle refresh his memory from the previous meetings. I think as a board in general, most of us felt as though the application did not create any, new problems. And I think the only open issue we had was the FAR data. I think at the time, as we deliberated, I think most of us felt that we could support the application if the FAR data showed us that it was not, going to be the biggest house in the neighborhood. And I'd just like to make that statement, because I think if we all recall that, the only issue on the table that was going to sway this one way or the other was the FAR data. That's my comment.
Okay, I appreciate that. That kind of bleeds in. I don't have any further questions, so Given the late hour, I just want to get this, move this along from questions into deliberations. And I think we've kind of, we've all kind of bled into that, but who would like to lead off on the deliberation point? Keeping in mind that I think Councilor, our Council Eichmann kind of framed it for us in reconsidering this and reopening this, that there's a motion to reconsider that might come up, or and then a new vote, or we can stand with the information provided. It would not taint any prior decision because we are aware of, we have been presented with new information. So I would agree that it shouldn't have an impact after taking this into consideration if we as a board decided, given the new information, we're still good. So with that in mind, I just wanted to open up the deliberations, and I'll just start top down with my list, which is Mr. Delisle. Do you have any further comments on this? I know.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I don't think I have any further comments on this.
Okay. Ms. Webb?
I guess I just wanted to add that I agree we did go down a rabbit hole with the FAR discussion, but I think it started in response to attempting to answer the question contextually about this proposal in relation to the neighborhood, so that we could answer the question of whether or not it was substantial, what they're proposing is substantially more detrimental than existing conditions in the neighborhood. So I think, that was kind of, in terms of my recollection, where this all began. And, I regret that, it turned out to be apples and oranges and we spent all this time on it, but it is a very good proposal. I can certainly support it as the record reflects from the prior meetings. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I was, of course, really dismayed when I found that the data we used to make this decision back on September 8th turned out to be apples and oranges. And I guess that's all come out now by tonight. And I think it was such pivotal data to our decision that I don't like the fact that we all made a decision. If you go read the minutes, 4 of us mentioned the new data, 3 of us specifically said the new FAR data was very important to our decision. So that's the record. And now we find out the data was apples and oranges. I think we need to rescind that decision and make a clean decision. So it's not based on that. And, that's kind of my take here. And I think, I'm sure our attorney could tell us the best way to word that. But it sounds like the first vote would be to rescind the decision that we made on September 8th. So that's what I think we need to do. And I think we should let it stand based on what we've now found to be data that could be viewed as very misleading. And perhaps it wasn't intended to be, it was a mistake, however we got here. But I think we need to undo that part of it and then move on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chagnon?
I guess I'd be okay with sticking with the original decision. I don't think the new FAR data that was shown to us today would have changed my views. So I'd be okay with sticking with the original decision if the rest of the board wanted to go down that road.
Fair enough. From my standpoint, my recollection of the FAR becoming the rabbit hole we all had to jump into started because when we were shown an original map of comps, there were holes in the neighborhood of the immediate abutters, and that kind of raised some antenna. Hey, why are we looking at, and this was the original iteration of FAR, why are we not seeing certain homes that are really close to the applicant's home being included? So please go back and fill in the blanks. And that was kind of I thought, in my recollection, is the impetus for requesting the data. and I would agree with some of my colleagues that I don't, so the data was refined, it was apples to oranges, we've all go down the rabbit hole. We now have all realized that it's an imperfect measure, but it was a measure that was included to at least provide some teeth into how to protect against overzealous developers on the island. So even with the new data that was presented tonight, I didn't see a huge difference in being able to ascertain, given all the information, the fact that the house is higher because it's on pilings to comply with flood zone. There's another story added onto it, so that full story is just going to, you know, the FAR is imperfect because it's a pretty simple equation, and it really punishes the smaller lots. Even with modest improvements, you're really gonna impact the FAR. So I am reticent to change the original opinion of this project as well. Even in light of these new ratios presented, I didn't think it changed anything in my mind more so than the original did. It took it a notch down. And granted, this is it's a big improvement, and it certainly is a change, but I can't say that it's more detrimental again to the neighborhood, even with the new data presented. So I think with that being said, I guess we need to, and I will defer to council, to Attorney Eichmann. We need now to see if there's someone wants to make a motion to reconsider. Would that be the first step? Or is it a motion to leave the prior decision?
Well, Mr. Chairman, a motion to reconsider would certainly be in order, as we discussed. But it would not be necessary to make it.
Okay.
You could stand on the vote you've already taken, or perhaps more procedurally accurate, given that you've now essentially taken new evidence, it may be worthwhile to have a vote to reaffirm the prior vote if you're not going to reconsider.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like we have a vote to reaffirm motion, or a vote to reconsider. If someone were to make that motion, then that's how we should proceed.
I would be happy, this is Mr. Swanton, I would be happy to make a motion to reconsider. I just don't know, would it be something like I move that we rescind our vote of September 8th on the special permit for nonconformities for 468th Street, file number 2020-030? Would that be the correct wording?
I believe the wording would just be to reconsider that.
Not rescind.
I agree. Yeah.
The correct would be a motion to reconsider the special permit on that.
Okay, I'll certainly go with you and council's suggestion there. Yep.
Okay.
So anyway, that's I'll put that motion out there.
So we have a motion to reconsider made by Mr. Swanton.
I'll second that, Mr. Delisle.
Okay, a motion to reconsider made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Delisle. And so we go to a vote. Mr. Delisle. Was that yes, I assume?
Yes.
Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Chagnon?
No.
And Mr. Moore is a no.
How many votes does it take?
Takes 4.
Does it?
Well, you use Robert's Rules of Order, do you not?
Yes.
Correct.
Right, and I do not have my Robert's Rules of Order book with me, unfortunately. You know,
Is it a simple majority? Or does it have to be silver?
it is in town meeting time. It's a simple majority. If anybody has a copy of the rules, I'm sorry, I don't have. I could try to look it up over here.
I think it's just the special permits that are special super majorities.
I thought we needed
Yeah,
4.
that's true.
I thought we needed 4 votes to pass them.
Yeah, it's 4 votes to issue the permit in the first place.
That's correct, right? But this is simply a motion for reconsideration. This is strictly a procedural.
So procedural just a simple majority.
Well, it's a procedural question under Robert's rules. This is what you follow. If
Got
you're
it.
following Robert's rules, that would be where you look for a quantum of vote. Hold on
I
a
don't
second.
have
I'm
that.
going to see. And I apologize. I did not. I will take a
Mr.
quick
Chair.
look to see if I.
Yes, Mr. Delisle.
While Mr. Eichmann's looking at the rule, one of the options that Mr. Eichmann gave us in the beginning of this was that we could reconsider, which would be followed again by a motion to approve the application.
Yeah, that's what I
Correct.
thought we were doing.
Yes.
I thought it was a
That's what I-
two-step process as well.
Two-step process.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yes.
Attorney Eichmann again.
Yeah.
My quick search on this indicates that under Robert's rules, a motion to reconsider is majority.
Majority. That's correct. All right, so we have a majority to reconsider. And now I agree that Attorney Eichmann, originally you said that once the motion to reconsider was made, then we can have a motion to have a new vote on the application.
Correct. After if the motion to reconsider passes, then yes, the floor would be open for a motion to approve the application.
So the motion to reconsider has passed, simple majority 3-2.
Correct.
So now we are open to a motion for a new vote on the application.
I'll make the motion. It's Rachel Webb. I'll make the motion to approve the, let's see, case number 2020-030R, special permit for nonconformities at 468th Street.
I'll second that, Stephen Delisle.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve made by Ms. Webb, seconded by Mr. Delisle. And we have a new vote on the application in process now. So we'll go through this. Mr. Delisle.
Oh, wait a sec. Is there going to be any discussion of this new motion?
I thought and I will ask, I thought the previous discussion covered this. That's a good question though.
If procedurally, it's certainly open. The chair can certainly allow discussion on the motion.
Then let's allow some discussion on this motion.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in, Ken Swanton, just want to make a comment. About 3 hours ago, we complimented a Plum Island application for coming in at 0.25 FAR and how wonderful that was. It's now 3 hours later, and we have before us an application that's at 0.32. And looking at the impact on the overall PIOD, if everybody out there builds at 0.32, that's a lot of density. And I just think, I know the hour is late, but we need to think about that if we're going to approve an application at that high level of FAR. That's my only comment.
Does anyone else have any comment?
This is Mr. Delisle. I concur that certainly for me on a going forward basis, the FAR is going to be treated very differently. However, this application has been around since August, and I tend to agree with Mr. Moore's conclusion earlier that we approved this on FAR before there was a mistake and there was bad math, bad reading of the ordinance, and a bad input given to this board. But you know, we've looked at this. The applicant has resubmitted additional information. We've considered the additional information, and I think we've all learned a lot. So I think that it's with regard to this application, but perhaps not on a going forward basis. I think that, you know, the applicant has has shown, I think, that this isn't going to be more detrimental to the PIOD and to the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. I'm just going to leave it open, given the hours. Anyone else wish to comment? All right, hearing no one else. Again, and I apologize for the choppiness of this, but this is, at least in my mind, is an unusual situation. So I'm just going to make sure procedurally, I want to make sure that I'm progressing through this properly. It already has been a hiccup or two, and there'll be some more. So given that discussion has closed, if we all feel ready for a vote, a new vote on this application, someone can make a motion. If we don't feel that we're ready, there's always the option to continue this to the next meeting. I don't know if that makes a difference to anyone, but
Mr. Chair, isn't there already a motion on the table?
Yeah, there already was one motion. I made the
Correct.
motion and Mr. Delisle seconded it, I believe.
I think we can vote.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's correct.
Thank you, Attorney Ackman. All right, with that, let's go to a vote, a new vote on this application. Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Ms. Webb,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
No.
Mr. Chagnon,
Yes.
and I am yes. That's a
Thank you
four in the affirmative. The application is passed or is approved.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your consideration and time.
You're welcome. With that, I believe we have finished all our business for the night.
That was a good discussion, by the way.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Excellent. We'll do this by voice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? See you later. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your patience with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Chair.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.